Chapter 4686. Jian Wushuang slowly turned around, and the hundreds of strands of imprisoned power spreading from his neck, and the dark blue gloss almost covered half of his face. Spring and Autumn took a breath. The chains between the necks of each prisoner contained the power of imprisonment that was terrible. Even Yanxian could not bear the pain. The power of imprisonment caused by Jian Wushuang was something he had never seen before. How much willpower will it take to endure this pain? After finally glancing at him, Jian Wushuang passed out. Spring and Autumn rushed forward, reaching for the sword Wushuang and holding it up. When he was about to flee, he glanced at the dozen treasures scattered in the void, and then took the treasures away with a wave of sleeves. Avoiding the boulders that came down from the sky, Chuanxiu carried the sword in the spring and autumn, just like the agile mountain ape, shuttled in front of the broken stone layer. And because the whole Tongtian Montenegro collapsed so fast, nearly 10,000 prisoners remained, falling directly into the abyss with the broken mine. The black-robed guardian was so frightened by the situation that he had been scared, and he almost turned around and fled when the Montenegro collapsed completely. "Hello, just leave?" A faint voice rang from behind, and the guardian slowly turned around. "I saw that at the end of the crumbling mine, two figures stood side by side, and one of them had a half-face covered with dark blue on pattern, but just raised his hand and took him directly." Chuanxiu raised a dagger at the right time and ruthlessly entered the guard's heart. The cooperation between the two is simple and neat, and everything is completed instantly. Then Jian Wushuang raised his hand like throwing garbage, throwing the deceased watchman into the abyss. "Go away." Spring and Autumn promised to pick him up and shuttle directly in the broken mine. Boom! The most magnificent towering Montenegro collapsed from within. Almost at the same time, in a cloudless and gigantic hall, a figure reclining on the bed quietly opened his eyes, and an unparalleled golden gleam emerged. Report to the little emperor. The next 3 days of Montenegro collapsed. When Montenegro collapsed completely, an embarrassed figure broke open and rushed out. Seeing the light, how long the joy of the rest of the life remained after the robbery, hundreds of black-robed guards ran directly from all sides. Looking at more and more guards, Chunkius' eyes turned upwards, and he just passed out. However, no one cared about the two prisoners, and all flew towards the collapsed ruins of Montenegro. And I wondered what to do. Damn, how could this Montenegro collapse? One of the oldest watchmen exasperated. With the protection of Lord Mountain Spirit, there is no possibility that this Montenegro will collapse. Is Lord Mountain Spirit already? It's impossible. Lord Shanling is Yanxian. Even if the little emperor comes, I'm afraid it can't be taken seriously. The noisy sound resounded, and nearly 1,000 guards in black robe were helpless. The collapse of Montenegro is by no means a trivial matter, and if the little emperor blames him, no one can afford it. The elders frowned, then crossed the crowd, and looked at the two figures collapsed on the ground. "Bring it down, interrogate carefully." Spring and Autumn eyes slightly opened a slit, and then continued to play faint. Confused, the two of them were thrown into a prison by being wrapped around. When they left, Chuanxiu sat up directly from the ground and took care of the sword. At the moment Jian Wushuang, his eyes closed, a stream of steaming sweat turned into mist rising from his body, and the imprisoned force covering half of his face began to fade. Chuanxiu hesitated a little, then wiped it from his arms, and took out a dark amethyst stone the size of a thumb to be stuffed into Jian Wushuang's mouth. However, I never thought that Jian Wushuang, who was in a coma, quietly opened his eyes, and his eyes with a heavy sense of prestige shocked Chunkius' hands, almost throwing the spar away. Are you okay?" Chuanxiu said intermittently. Jian Wushuang didn't open his mouth, reached for the spar in his hand, and stuck it in his mouth without thinking. The spar entrance is directly transformed into pure and surging force, quickly repairing the broken meridian. Seeing his gradual recovery, Chuanxiu finally breathed a sigh of relief. "It's okay, nothing is fine." "Where is this place?" Jian Wushuang turned around and asked. "Prison, a place where prisoners who make mistakes are temporarily held, and we will go out soon." Chuanxiu seemed familiar with this. Jian Wushuang nodded his head, and then looked at the chain iron plate between his necks. In the dark, he always felt that the lines on the iron plate were familiar, but he couldn't think of where he had seen it. I advise you not to use brute force to destroy this thing. Even Yin Xian can't do anything about it. Chunqiu kindly reminded. Through his statement, Jian Wushuang suddenly recalled that when he had no intention of breaking into Dian Huan, the AZ monster he encountered, and the Qinghuan woman, also had such an iron medal on their necks. Will these iron cards be the same? Thoughts were a little confused. Jian Wushuang felt very speechless. Entering Daanhuan for the first time, he lay directly in the barren land for nearly 600,000 years. This time he made all preparations, but directly became a prisoner of rank. What kind of is really unfriendly? In order to make sure that he did not come to the wrong place, Jian Wushuang asked about Chunqiu around him again. Chunqiu heard that, and looked at him with a smirk, and then said, I said, brother, we are not in Daanhuan, can we succeed in nothingness? To be precise, we are now in the 3 days under Daisai. 3 days under the big domain? Jian Wushuang was at a loss. Looking at the bewilderment in his eyes, even spring and autumn were a little helpless, explaining. The so-called Desiyu is just a realm among the countless realms. There is no special meaning. You just need to know that you are being prisoners in captivity will do. Speaking of it back, judging from the fact that you killed Na Yinxian in the Montenegro before, I don't believe they can catch you. Strong curiosity appeared on Chunqi's face. You could it be the emperor in which realm? Jian Wushuang shook his head. From the moment he opened his eyes in Daanhuan, he became what he is now. And then he went into the mountains and mines non-stop, killing Yinxian. After this series of things came down, it seemed that there were big hands in him, pushing him forward. How to get rid of the prisoner's identity, and this. Jian Wushuang pointed to the chain between his necks. It's very simple, Chunqiu grinned. Escape from here, or kill the little emperor. Kill the little emperor. Jian Wushuang repeated it in the bottom of his heart. When he was about to ask again, Chunqiu spoke again. If you, like me, used to be one emperor, then you can only leave here by destroying the emperor. Chapter 4687. Jian Wushuang leaned in front of the haystack and said, I'm not the emperor you said, but you Yanni. Chunqiu didn't say much. After giving a smile, he stopped talking. Why did you become a prisoner because of what you got here? Jian Wushuang turned to look at him. Because of the defeat. Chunqiu did not conceal, and said slowly, my father used to be an emperor but died in the war. Although I was the emperor, I was saved from the slaughter, but I also became a prisoner of the ranks. It's a pleasure to come. Do you know how many years my appearance has been? Chunqiu laughed at himself. Even the birth and death of the galaxy and the world, I don't know how many reincarnations have begun. I want to leave here all the time, but in the end it is nothing but luxury. Jian Wushuang did not speak, and the chain of imprisonment between his necks was difficult to lift. This fundamentally limited his ability greatly, and he might die if he was not careful. So he can't do anything now, can't say wait for the time. Time passed, and a few days later, a few hurried footsteps suddenly sounded in the dead prison. Then nearly 10 black robes appeared. Jian Wushuang, who was slowly restoring Yanli, just glanced a little at a glance, and learned that there were at least 2 ancestors among these nearly 10 people. One of the thin old men took a step forward, and after glancing at him and Chunqiu, he immediately raised his palm and grabbed them. Jian Wushuang's eyes flicked, and at the same time, his palms flew away, and the ethereal force directly offset the palm print of the dry and thin old man. There was a shock in the eyes of the dry and thin old man, and then he took a deep breath and said, Are you going to kill? Jian Wushuang glanced at him calmly, then got up and walked out slowly, followed by Chunqiu. As he was escorted away from the prison, Jian Wushuang looked into the vast square. And in front of the vast square, there is a simple bronze giant hall located in the clouds and smoke. And the clouds and smoke are various scenes, which is quite mysterious. Walking forward, Jian Wushuang at this time was like a mighty emperor, without any consciousness as a prisoner. The dry and thin old man was quite angry about this. But judging from the confrontation just now, this little emperor designated the person he wanted to see. By no means he could compete. Chunqiu, who was right behind Jian Wushuang, looked up at the bronze giant palace, and the slightly wrinkled eyes flickered, and the hatred flashed away, then calmed down again. The huge bronze gate that opened up to 100 feet deeply opened, and hundreds of clouds of smoke flew out, turning into chasing birds, and the cloud butterfly hovered in front of everyone. In the depths of the giant hall, a figure dressed in extravagant clothes, half leaning on the bed, looked out of the hall door. Facing each other, the extravagant figure slowly rose, with long hair hanging down to the ground, the faces of boys and girls, the unspeakable charming and charming. "Welcome to the Emperor's bedroom, everyone." He raised his eyebrows and raised his arms slowly. "Have seen the little Emperor?" More than 10 black-robed guards knelt down and knelt. With a light wave of his hand, the extravagant figure known as the little Emperor said softly, "Go ahead. No one is allowed to step further without my order." A crowd of black robes responded, and then withdrew from the hall in full. Staying barefoot, the little Emperor stretched lazily and walked slowly. With each step he moved, an identical real image emerged from behind him, and there were already dozens of real images in the originally empty and dead palace. Strong and extreme dynamism fills every space. Looking at the more and more figures in front of him, Jian Wushuang's pupils moved slightly, and he could feel that all the real shadows were the realm of Yanxian. This little Emperor's strength is unfathomable. Even he feels a sense of inexplicable crisis. A total of nearly 100 true images are close together, and a strong fragrance with a faint smell is coming. "Newcomer, do you know where I am?" Zhenyan climbed around Jian Wushuang and asked. Spring and Autumn, who stepped back a few steps, was dreadful, and the dagger was already clenched in his palm. Jian Wushuang was as immobile as the mountains, just closed his eyes for a moment, then suddenly opened his eyes, just like crossing mountains and rivers for 1,000 years. The eyes were far apart, and the little Emperor smiled quietly, then applauded, and hundreds of true shadows were all the same. "It's really a bit of a skill, but why haven't I seen you before?" Zaya Audigen smiled, and then looked at the Spring and Autumn behind him. "Hey, I've seen you, son of Fenghua Emperor Spring and Autumn." Spring and Autumn's complexion changed drastically, and resentment spread across his face. The right hand holding the dagger suddenly snapped out, and the powerful Yanli directly pierced the Emperor's heart. The corners of his mouth curled up a little, and he stood there in no way. At the next moment, a layer of undulating ripples wafted in the space, and a thin figure hidden under the purple robe emerged. At the same time, a stronger and more powerful force directly destroyed Chunkius' offensive, all of which hit him. Chuanxiu groaned. His figure fell for dozens of feet, and he slammed into the bronze giant door before he barely stopped arcana scattered all over the place. The little Emperor's face was solidified. How could he not know what was the treasure that was scattered from Chunkius' arms, and just go through the sky, and all the treasures scattered on the ground would fall into his hands? "This is Yanxian under the Black Mountain was killed by you?" Little Emperor's face sighed, and he waved his hands to kill Spring and Autumn. However, at this time, Jian Wushuang Kuei suddenly stood in front of Chuanxiu and said softly, "That Yanxian was killed by me, and it has nothing to do with him." The little Emperor withdrew his palms as if nothing had happened, carrying his hands, and turning to walk slowly. "The spirit who guards the Black Mountain, for Yanxian realm. I really want to know, how do you kill him when you have a chain?" Suddenly raging force in the hall of death and silence. The thin body of the purple robe moved, and waved directly at Jian Wushuang. Mastering the strength of Howding, there is no spillover, and even the air has not swept. But the terror power contained in it makes Jian Wushuang not dare to carelessly, and directly urges the strength to resist. The seemingly indifferent palm directly knocked him back a few feet away, and the raging power dissipated. The blood that was tumbling in Ninja's body. When Jian Wushuang was about to fight again, the thin purple robe closed, and turned and followed behind the little Emperor. Chapter 4688. Perhaps it was Gu Jianwushwang's intention that Xiaodajan smiled secretly. But I am happy today, Xiaodajan, and saved you two's death sins, but death sins are exempt and living sins cannot escape. Just punish you two to go to Wanmushan, and get rid of some trouble for me, how? Jianwushwang Ding fixed his eyes on him, did not speak. If you get rid of those troubles, I will not only save you from death, but also give you a free body. At that time, this chain of imprisonment will be lifted by myself. Chuanxio was stunned on the spot for a moment. Then he could redeem his freedom. And the temptation to him was too great. He no longer knows how many times he has been a prisoner. And even the Milky Way above the sky dome has been extinguished several times. The day of mining in the Black Mountain day after day has caused him the utmost pain. He also thought about the source of self-destruction. But the chains of confinement between his necks prevented him from committing suicide. But now, when hope comes up, Chuanxio is reluctant to give up and looks at Jianwushwang almost crazy. As time passed slowly, Xiaodajan seemed to be in no hurry to receive a reply, and leaned back on the Chinese bed again to close his eyes and recuperate. For a while Jianwushwang's voice sounded, "Okay, I should get off." "Wise." Little Emperor quietly opened his eyes and played with the taste. Then, set off immediately. In the next 3 days there will never be a sky dome shining by the sun. Just as the prisoners could not see the end of the years. When that closed enclave appeared in Jianwushwang's eyes, dozens of figures stopped in the void. Putting a snow-white big cloak, Little Emperor and Jianwushwang stood side by side, throwing him something at hand. This inverted mirror is used for communication between you and us. If you get rid of a trouble, you will reflect them in the mirror. I will know. Remember what I said. I want this whole Wanmushan to be completely wiped out. Receiving the mirror, Jianwushwang looked at him. It's better to remember your commitment. After the words, Jianwushwang did not stay any longer, and took Chuanxio to step into the enchantment. In the dim sky, the little emperor smiled. Your Highness, why did you let him enter the world of 10,000 eyes? Even if I didn't want to fight in it, he went in, fearing that he would die for a lifetime. The thin purple robe who had always stood behind him finally said. The little emperor said, For me he is a variable. I do allow any variable. This is just a test. If he does pass, he will naturally die in the world of 10,000 eyes, and save a lot of trouble. If he passed, it would be a better thing for me. It is possible to kill the Black Mountain Yanxian with the chain of imprisonment. I am afraid that his strength is never under you. But I am very curious. How did he appear among the prisoners? Ma'am, I must find out who caught him back later. Xiaodajan narrowed his eyes narrowly. If he is one emperor, then I will keep him. The purple robe nodded, and then dozens of figures disappeared. At this moment Wuxia, the sword traveling through the dark enchantment, looked into the distance with his eyes and looked at everything. In the previous conversation with Chuanxio, Jianwushwang knew this Feng Xianqi realm, but it was just a drop of the sea in Dianhuan. The entire territory was built in 6 days. The next 3 days were the prisoners' gathering place, responsible for mining the amethysts in the Black Mountain. The remaining 3 days were named Xiaogushan, Degushan, and Wanmushan, which was about to enter. The person who is in full control of the entire 6-day realm is the charming little emperor. And the whole territory of the 6 magnificent heavens was also the jurisdiction assigned to him by his emperor. Jianwushwang is naturally not very interested in these things. At present, what he needs to do most is to enter the world of 10,000 eyes, kill the trouble everywhere, and exchange for a free body. The dark enchantment is not so prolonged. It flew with all its strength for more than half a day, and Jianwushwang stepped into it step by step. Looking around, the endless red sand is the main color of the entire Wanmushan. The wind whimpered and rolled a huge amount of red sand. Jianwushwang waved an enchantment with his hand and blocked the wild sand. Although the strength of the entire Wanmutianzhong is abundant, there are too many impurities in it, which is obviously not suitable for absorption, which increases the difficulty invisible. Spring and autumn with a swollen nose and blue face followed Jianwushwang's body, fearing that she would encounter a big crisis when walking slowly. Immediately afterwards, Chuanxiu stopped him again, and then took out more than 10 treasures from his arms. Jian Wushuang's true look. These treasures are exactly what Yin Xian has under the Montenegro. Isn't it all taken away by the little emperor? Chuanxiu grinned. He just took 7 or 8 pieces, and more than a dozen pieces are naturally with me. You can choose a few self-defenses, and talk better than nothing. Jian Wushuang also did not shirk, and directly selected a delicate thumb jade gourd, an octagonal rung, and half a black bronze mask. After putting the jade gourd and black copper mask in his arms, he directly used this octagonal rung. Immerse a drop of divine blood into the center of the rung, and then throw it in the air. The octagonal rung directly transforms into a body exactly like Jian Wushuang. Although the puppet released by this is only nearly 60% of its strength, Jian Wushuang is still more satisfied with the effectiveness of this octagonal fusee. After all, there is an extra helper, which greatly increases the vitality in these 10,000 days. Judging from the performance of the little emperor, the situation in the 10,000 eyes heaven is by no means optimistic. I am afraid that the so-called troubles will far exceed Jian Wushuang's expectations. Slowly moving forward, on this endless red sand wasteland, the silence was at its extreme, and even the breath of half-divided creatures never existed. Be careful. No one has stepped in this 10,000 sky. I don't know what trouble will be waiting for us. Chuanxiu said nervously. Jian Wushuang did not speak. The invisible sword has already appeared in his hand. At the next moment, the boundless red sand wasteland suddenly rushed out several mad sands from the depths of the earth. Like a roaring dragon roaring, the wild sand rushing almost to the sky is rolling over the wind like a knife is raging. Jian Wushuang directly lifted the invisible sword, releasing the vast sword intention. The unimaginable sword meaning instantly turned into a long river of kendo. Each sword meaning was sparkling and magnificent. Who dares to contend with the sword spirit of Yinxian realm? The river of swordsmanship swept up in the heavens and earth, and directly crushed the 6 giant pillars of red sand into powder, and then sprinted between the heavens and the earth, which almost covered the sky domes. A arrogant boy who dares to pull off the old man's beard, what is the crime? The vast voice resounded like Hong Zhong de Lu in this world, and the whole Qisha wasteland began to be restlessly agitated. One side was so huge that it was unimaginable. As the sand and stone fell, it slowly condensed out. Chapter 4689. The face of spring and autumn has changed greatly, and the supreme breath that has penetrated the world has definitely surpassed the Black Mountain Yinxian. Instead, Jian Wushuang was very calm, carrying both hands and looking forward. Sword Brother Xiong, I think we should leave now. I'm afraid it's not something we can deal with. Chunky's voice trembled, and he had already retreated. In his view, leaving does not necessarily mean death, but leaving a certain death on the spot. Even if he believed in Jian Wushuang again, it was difficult to imagine how the realm of Yanli was imprisoned, how to fight the supreme aura at the moment. As the horror winds raged, the entire Qisha wasteland turned into that giant face. Jian Wushuang and Chuanxiu stood on the nose of the giant face. The 2 rounds of dark eyes like the abyss, like the borderless Black Sea, make people look at it and fall into the abyss. Brother Jian, it's too late to leave. A cold sweat poured from the spring and autumn temples. Jian Wushuang heard the words and looked at him. Don't you want to go back and become a prisoner looking at the Milky Way? Chuanxiu was shocked, and the dark and extreme past came back to his heart, and then his eyes gradually firmed, and he gritted his teeth. Then give it a try. The red sand wasteland is sinking and condensed on the giant surface. Besides standing the sword Wushuang duo, there is another body like a quicksand gathering. It was a figure wearing a splendid emperor's costume. Although the emperor's costume had been damaged, it was still difficult to conceal its prestige. The dry and long hair resembles dry grass, swaying with the wind. The tall and thin old man in the emperor's clothes is bare feet, and he looks like a ruthless emperor. It's just that the tall, thin old man is especially bad-looking. It's the real Wuyang Lao heir under the dog, who gave you the confidence to disturb the emperor. The side of the spring and autumn whispered carefully to Jian Wushuang popular science. The old Wu Yang in his mouth is the emperor of the little emperor. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly, then directly pulled out the invisible sword, and the surging sword swept up. Although he had been promoted to Yanxian, he was firmly suppressed by the chain of imprisonment, but fortunately his swordsmanship was not suppressed. So Jian Wushuang was confident and could fight Yanxian realm. Obviously, this tall and thin old man who claimed to be an emperor had already broken his body. And this is just his real soul right now. If it is really fighting, Jian Wushuang is confident that even if it is difficult to win, he can retreat. I'm sorry, I'm going to completely wipe out the 10,000 eyes today, Jian Wushuang said in a condensed voice. The tall, thin old man narrowed his eyes narrowly. Boy with no hair tied up dared to speak wildly? Will it be overthrown? But this emperor turned his hands, it is so. No longer ignoring him, Jian Wushuang directly bowed slightly, and a longitudinal sweep raised his invisible sword in his hand and cut him. Chuanxiu also set off at the same time, with a move in both hands, and a fate puppet out of the octagonal fuzhua. He ran along. Dare to bully this emperor to death. The tall, thin old man exasperated, nearly 100 red sand giant pillars, rushing from behind him, like a meridian deep in the earth's core, stunned Xiang Jianwushuang. The earthquake shook and the cracks shattered the sky. Qi Juju directly wrapped the two of them, and began to nibble. The tall, thin old man rose above the sky, sitting on a throne condensed by Qi, and looked leisurely in front of the battle in the void. Although Jian Wushuang's breath made the tall, thin old man palpitate, he was confident that he was an immortal existence in this red sand world. Even if the real Wu Yang arrived, he would dare to fight 3 points. The red sand giant pillars are intertwined with each other, forming a rounded trend. Jian Wushuang and Chuanxiu are in it, and they can easily feel the rapid disappearance of the diffusivity in the body. At the same time, this red sand is extremely mobile and can easily absorb and wipe out most attacks, which is extremely tricky. Another sword was bombarded, but it only shattered a crack in Qi and soon disappeared again. Seeing that the siege was getting tighter and tighter, Jian Wushuang no longer hides his clumsiness, stabbing with no fancy sword. Wushuang Kendo, Zingahohai Jini first form star. The sword intention rose into the sky, and Wushuang Bao emerged behind him, turning into the most arrogant sword, straight ahead. Hundreds of swords and swords studded into the sky, bursting out of the red sand. The tall, thin old man sitting on the throne changed suddenly and looked down shocked. At the next moment, the most shocking martyr burst under the entire sky dome. Qi, Luyan and the sky all shattered at this moment. Jian Wushuang closed his sword and stood, looking directly at the sky dome. Good boy, you succeeded in angering the emperor. Angrily rushed to the crown, the tall, thin old man angrily shattered the throne under him, turned into a thick golden light, and shot toward the sword. Jian Wushuang snorted coldly, suddenly raised his left palm, and faced up without retreating. Chuanxiu was also at this time, tolerating the paralysis of the meridians, and releasing the magnificent force. Boom! 3 magnificent collisions of extreme strength, directly tore the small world. Jian Wushuang retreated half a step, and quickly waved his palms to wipe the dust that filled the sky. Only then did he see the half-shadow of the tall, thin old man on the misty sky, on the side of the spring and autumn. A big spit of smoke and dust spit out, and then watched from the left and right. Human, wouldn't it be taken directly? Actually ran chasing. Jian Wushuang's eyebrows were startled, and he darted forward and ran forward. Chuanxiu was stunned, and then followed closely. Far away from this small sand world, under the dim sky dome, a slightly embarrassed figure fled into a hurry. It was the tall, thin old man who was full of fan and yelling. Damn Jinwu Yang Lao. This emperor has been dead for so many years, and he didn't plan to let it go. Wait. I will go back to move the rescuers and kill all your dog legs first. Jian Wushuang's speed is extremely fast almost every breath. It can cross a world of hundreds of millions of miles. This is due to the fact that he first strayed into Dian Huan, and lay down a kind of magical power that he had realized for 500,000 years, named Shanhainian. Wherever the heart thinks, mountains and rivers come. Moreover, The power consumption of this little supernatural power is almost negligible, and the current situation has become an important method of swordsmanship. With the blessing of mountains and rivers, almost in a few moments, he approached the tall and thin old man, who was still fleeing in embarrassment. In the spring and autumn, Jian Wushuang's figure was also invisible. Perceiving the sudden burst of air behind him, the tall, thin old man looked back subconsciously, and at this glance, the suddenly scared spirits were scattered. Jian Wushuang didn't know when he had followed. The sharp invisible sword in his hand was almost going to be cut. Chapter 4690. Taking a deep breath, the tall and thin old man who dare not stop in one step did not forget to turn around and shout, "Shizi, I advise you to return at a fast speed. Before you acted offensively, the emperor will not blame it. Otherwise, the iron fist of this emperor is not something you can afford to wait for." Why is this guy so long-winded? Jian Wushuang was a little speechless. He used to see too many disagreements, drawing swords and chopping off each other. In the face of such a kind old man, he didn't know how to shoot. Judging from the trouble in the mouth of the little emperor, this entire one mission should be to clear the true soul of these emperors. Jian Wushuang has never been an indecisive person. He has too much to do to enter Daanhuan, and he can never be imprisoned in Montenegro. No longer hesitating, Jian Wushuang directly aimed at the tall and thin old man, striking down sharply and sharply. The tall, thin old man was startled, almost instinctively sideways, able to escape the horrific blow. So far, the two are chasing each other in this world. Rao is a tall and thin old man who is only in the form of a soul, but his strength is at its highest, and Jian Wushuang can't help him for a while. However, the chaos all happened to kill the master. Jian Wushuang waved a sword dance behind him. One of the swords was poking at the old man's butt, making him scream like a plucking pig. "Shizi, dare to sneak attack on this emperor, and in the future you will be called upon by your soul to be lashed out." The tall, thin old man couldn't care about covering the injured part, and turned his head to say cruelly. Jian Wushuang was helpless, and at the same time he began to doubt deeply whether this narrative-like nag was really an emperor. Another round of confrontation. The invisible sword made several wounds on the tall and thin old man, and he cursed again and again when he hurt. Jian Wushuang ignored him, and was determined to wipe out all eyes. Perhaps he knew that the general trend was gone, and he could not escape. The tall, thin old man simply stayed in place, looking like he was going to kill him. Under this unexpected situation, Jian Wushuang almost stabbed in the past. The tall, thin old man carried his hands on his back and laughed aloud. "Good boy, this emperor is the of death today, and I want to ask you to bring a sentence to that real Wuyang old man. You just say, Yang Jun has regrets. His biggest regret, I just couldn't see you wearing filial piety and filial piety. As the last filial son, ha ha. Jian Wushuang is full of black lines. Come on, kill Ben Emperor and go back to his life." The tall, thin old man spread his arms. There was a moment of hesitation flashing in Jian Wushuang's eyes, and the invisible long sword he raised was put down again. Judging from the performance of this tall and thin old man, he is not a man of great evil, but has a real temperament. Compared with the boy and girl, the little emperor with a gloomy face, it is more like a good person. There was a moment of silence between heaven and earth, and a tall, thin old man with a deadly expression didn't wait for a blow. "Do you have any way to hide the breath, or leave here and never step here?" Jian Wushuang retracted the long sword and said quietly. The tall, thin old man was stunned. Apparently he hadn't responded. "Aren't you killing me?" "Too lazy to kill," Jian Wushuang said concisely. The expression of the tall and thin old man became wonderful immediately. "Good boy. I said you are righteous. How can you be with shameless people such as Jinwu Yang Lao Air? The emperor really read right. Don't disturb, say the right thing, leave here." Jian Wushuang said helplessly. The tall, thin old man scratched his head, his face awkward. At the next moment, the sky and earth suddenly changed color, and the clouds seemed to roll up and down the sea of sea, surging and changing. "Who dares to break into Wan Mushin?" The low-pitched voice with supreme power resounded through the world, rushing across. Even Jian Wushuang's calm heart trembled. The tall, thin old man was so impatient when he saw such a changing scene. This old thing, every time it is played, is like a big show, and it is very cheap. Immediately afterwards, an old man with supreme prestige came to the wind, also wearing the imperial clothes, although the same was broken, but it was difficult to hide the power of terror. The eyes are far away from each other. Jian Wushuang runs Yanli almost the first time, but the tall, thin old man was very calm, and he raised his head and drank directly. Old Dao Gong, come down quickly and pick up the guests. Jian Wushuang is full of black lines. Old things just crying and crying for help. Now you are backed by your father and you're stiff? The old man, who was still holding a shelf in the cloud, heard the words, and rushed down with his sleeves in his hands. The tall, thin old man pouted, very skillfully avoided a kick, and said, "The old thing has a shape right away, it's about the three of us." The old man of Wei heard that. As if nothing had happened, he rolled down his sleeves and watched Jian Wushuang vigilantly. "Lao Zemyang asked you to persuade?" "Wrong, this kid must not deal with Xin Wuyang." The tall and thin old man reminded timely. "Then what are you doing here?" Elder Wei looked at Jian Wushuang again. "It's about myself, and I have to come to clear these 10,000 eyes," Jian Wushuang said. "I don't want to create a killing industry for no reason, so I want to invite the two to leave here, and don't step here." As Jian Wushuang's voice fell, an angry voice rang out from the sky, speaking loudly, "Ignorant child." This time did not wait for Jian Wushuang to react. The tall and thin old man, and the old man of Wei shot at the same time, and the two forces rushed directly to the cloud, so that the voice disappeared directly. "What is your relationship with Zhenmiang?" Wei old man asked. Jian Wushuang directly said, "I don't know any true Wuyang. The reason why I came to clean up is just to be helpless. What if we don't leave? Then I can only clear this place," Jian Wushuang said slowly. The elder Wei smiled angrily. His strength condensed into substance, and turned into hundreds of pointed cones pointing at him. "It's up to you, don't you plan to pray for some survival?" "There is something to discuss, too brutal to use brute force," said the tall, thin old man. Then he looked at Jian Wushuang. There was some embarrassment in his eyes. "It's not that we don't want to leave, but this is beyond the realm of sight, and it is all in the realm of Jinwuyang Lauer. I found out that the three of us had to dissipate the true soul. Therefore we can't get out of this million eyes, and we can't go back." Chapter 4691. A few people were unclear, so the tall, thin old man stepped forward, staring at Chuanxiu Dao. "Little friends, can you take a look at the treasures on you?" Chuanxiu looked at Jian Wushuang, and after getting affirmation, he took out many treasures in his arms. But the tall and thin old man's eyes turned around in that treasure, but he didn't find anything, and he couldn't help but wonder. "Strange, I clearly felt the existence of the Bottle-Yang bottle. How could it not be?" Jian Wushuang thought for a moment, then took out the thumb jade gourd he had previously picked from his arms. Seeing this, the tall, thin old man, his eyes full of glory, flew directly to his body, raised his hands and took the delicate gourd into his hands. Afterwards he sighed with emotion. "It's true that time is also fate. Going around indefinitely, I finally saw my treasure again." The elder Wei smiled disdainfully. "Just a broken bottle filled with things like a baby is too much to be a night pot for this emperor. You know what a fart?" The tall, thin old man hurriedly retorted. "Your side of the court is not even fart in front of the emperor's bowl of yang." The old man of Wei subconsciously rolled up his sleeves again. "It's not even a fart? Then let's talk about it and say, who was the mother of the emperor, who helped the emperor billions of miles? Without you, your heaven would have turned into gray." The tall, thin old man looked as if he was blue. "You're running for a fart, and Laozi's heavenly court has been broken up, and you rushed over. The emperor didn't pour urine on the spot, and washed you away." Jian Wushuang. Spring and autumn. Seeing that the two were about to start in desperation, Jian Wushuang said helplessly, "I said to the two, we should discuss something important." The two of them just pushed their sleeves down, and they were all indignant. "With this bowl of yang bottle, we will be just around the corner when we leave here." The tall, thin old man glared at him. and his unexplainable excitement was revealed in his eyes. Elder Wei also reacted and hurriedly leaned towards the tall and thin old man. I understand. You mean we go in and take this away from Wan Yushin? Can't the real Wuyang old man find it? Yes, you've got a hack in the head of the night pot. The tall, thin old man smiled proudly. Although this bowl of yang bottle can't carry the heaven, it's more than enough to hold our 3 old guys. Despite the scolding, the old man of Wei finally showed a hint of excitement. In these 10,000 eyes, although they are not afraid of the invasion of the small emperor and others, for the emperor who once controlled one side of the heaven, it was already too suffocating. Even they themselves do not know how many years have passed. I am afraid that it has been so long ago that even the Milky Way has broken 10 or so. Now there is an almost perfect way to escape. How can they not be excited? The two looked at Jian Wushuang coincidentally, and their eyes became more and more prosperous. Jian Wushuang felt a slight cold in his heart, and this kind of taste was always bad. Little friend, we can leave now. The tall, thin old man took a step forward, raised his thumb-sized jade gourd excitedly. We just need to enter this bowl of yang bottle. We can hide everything with one breath. That's that Jinwu Yang Lao air came. And he couldn't find it at all. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows slightly. But if they are found, they will all suffer. I don't really want to do risky things. The tall, thin old man stunned and said hurriedly, You have 10,000 hearts. This bowl of yang bottle was originally what I held when I was an emperor. It was enough to hold one side of the world. It was really easy to hold the 3 of us. Not enough. Having finished speaking, in order to verify the authenticity of the words, the tall and thin old man directly pulled the gourd plug and eagerly drilled in. But only a few seconds later, he drilled out at a faster speed than before. His mother, who lives inside my baby gourd, it's stinking. Jian Wushuang is a little clear. These treasures were in the hands of Yanxian and Heishan before. It is very likely that this bowl of yang bottle will be used as a place to live, eat, and drink. After briefly explaining the situation to him, the tall and thin old man, who escaped the centrifugation, did not delve into it. He held his nose and showed it to Jian Wushuang. Sure enough, this treasure bottle seemed to be able to isolate everything, and it became a line. The breath of the tall and thin old man disappeared completely. Little friend, how? The tall, thin old man's figure emerged and he smiled. Jian Wushuang nodded. It can be, so it is a way. But before that, I need you to accompany me in a play. This is okay. Our acting skills are relatively good, especially the goods, the best at pretending to be dead. Tall and thin old man raised his finger to the old man of Wei. This time, however, he surprisingly did not refute, but stared at Jian Wushuang. Let's say, is this strategy an idea devised by Zhen Weiyang's cunning son? The tall, thin old man heard the words, and his face changed suddenly. The old man of Wei smiled coldly. Otherwise, why are you so clever? When your emperor's body disappeared, this bowl of yang bottle fell into the hands of Jinwu Yang Lao's army. Guy, holding this bowl of yang bottle, come to clear Wan Yushin. Will there be so many coincidences? The tall, thin old man suddenly realized. I said something is wrong, so you have to outsmart? Jian Wushuang was completely numb to these 2 old men. And this drama that completely made up his mind made him completely ignorant. The elder Wei smiled with pride. Thanks to this emperor's long obsession with the art of conspiracy, you go back and tell Jinwu Yang Lao to persuade him not to work hard. And some of our older brothers will sooner or later take his nest. Jian Wushuang has already lost patience. I just said one thing. I do know the real son of Wu Shi. And I'm not even familiar with his son. If you do want to do that, then I can only insist on clearing Wan Mutian. The 2 of them were like enemies. And just before they started, a voice sounded quietly. I said, you 2 old and immortal. If you miss this opportunity, you are all ready to destroy your true soul. Above the sky dome, wearing the same emperor's clothes, and having a strange double pupil, stepped down the cloud, and looked at him contemptuously. The mediocre disturbs me. I believe this little friend and Zhenwiang have nothing gugu, willing to follow him out of this 10,000 eyes. Suhi, are you still awake? The truth has been revealed. Wei old man said in a deep voice. In the middle of the world, when Su He, who had a strange double pupil, was cut under the sword by Jian Wushuang, this acting award, which lasted for several months, was finally declared over. Facing these three living treasure old men, Jian Wushuang only felt that his head was all in a circle, far more painful than going through 100 battles. Chuanxia wiped a virtual sweat on his forehead and solemnly handed him the inverted mirror. It's finally alive. This emperor can finally leave here with a big swing. The tall, thin old man was excited. The old man of Wei snorted. Shake it. Do you want to drill the night pot? Don't make you look like that. Well, finally admitted that the bottle is a night pot. You. Jian Wushuang quickly waved his hand to stop. Everything is over. Please leave with me. The three stopped the new round of scolding. Then the tall and thin old man took the lead in solemnly arching his hand. Yang Jun thanked the little friends here. The elder Wei then said, Dao Gongxiong thanks Xie Xiaoyu. The old pupil with double pupils laughed. Su He and others thank you all. After saying this, the three figures turned into three golden ons and fell into the bottle in an instant. Feeling the shock from the bottle, Jian Wushuang shook his head helplessly, finally cleared. Let's go, now that 10,000 eyes have been wiped out. Jian Wushuang looked at Chuanxia Road. In the spring and autumn, my heart was surging. From the beginning, I embraced the mortal mentality into this 10,000 eyes. Until the dramatic end now. Everything is too mysterious and coincidental. Clearing Wan Mushin means that he can already end his long dark prisoner career and be able to return to freedom. But then, there was another nervous anxiety rising from the bottom of my heart. And Chuanxia looked at Jian Wushuang with some anxiety. If, then the little emperor will turn back. What should I do? Slowly spit out a murky breath. An array of golden ons emerged from the depth of Jian Wushuang's pupils. If he turns back, I will drag him back before he dies. The endless dimness dissipated. The whole Wan Mushin began to be clear and clear. The river began to emerge from the ground, and countless trees and vines began to grow crazy. Looking back at the last cleared world, Jian Wushuang disappeared in its place. In front of the bronze giant palace in Yunding, the two figures fell quietly, and then stepped forward. The gate of the bronze giant hall opened, and in the middle of the hall door of the 100-foot-high Yu reading book www.akanshu.com there was a frail body. Little Emperor seems to have been waiting for a long time. When he saw the figure in the square in front of him, he smiled slightly. My partner, please come and meet us, our guests. After speaking this sentence, the little emperor turned and entered the palace. The thin purple robe walked up to Jian Wu's two sides and reached out to ask for something. Jian Wushuang squinted at him, then walked straight into the bronze giant hall. You will promise me, I am not a wicked person. This is just a win-win situation. Xiao Dijuan leaned back on the Chinese bed again, as if he had settled him. When you leave so urgently, it is not because of fear, but what you are looking for. But in this great Yan Huan, all the emperors in Yin Xian are nothing but a tiny dust. There is no heaven, no foundation. I can guarantee you will die soon, let alone seek aimlessly. The little emperor got up and approached Jian Wushuang softly. As long as you help me ascend to the emperor's throne, I will definitely let you become an emperor in this great Yan Huan. Jian Wushuang stopped talking, but looked at him coldly. The little emperor smiled, and then stretched out his palm from the extravagant clothes and pressed it between his necks. The iron chain with a big imprisonment shattered. The surging force to the extreme of Yan's strength instantly filled up to the limbs, and the realm of Yan Xian, who had been imprisoned, was completely released, and his whole breath rose to another state. Jian Wushuang gave him a deep look, and then turned to leave. However, stepping out, the dark places on both sides of the giant hall slowly walked out of a purple robe. Every purple robe is filled with vast dynamism, no less than 20 yin xian. Jian Wushuang stood in place, and the little emperor followed up, placing his palm on his shoulder. I have told you my ambitions and secrets, and you know what it means. More than 20 yin xian, even if Jian Wushuang has completely released the realm, until the last moment, I am afraid there is no possibility of rushing out of this siege, 10 deaths and no life. The threat is clear. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Are you threatening me?" "It's not a threat, it's just an attitude," Xiao Dijuan shrugged. "This is a win-win situation. I really can't let you go. It's only 100 years. No matter whether it is successful or not, I will not bother you again. In return, everything you want is served, including this entire 6-day realm. The hall is dead. Only the rest of the lights and candles went out." For a long time Jian Wushuang said, "Okay." Xiao Dijuan's pale face finally showed a smile. "Very well, welcome to the new territories. The sword has no two-sided color and is extremely calm. Limited to 100 years. Understood." Xiao Dijuan smiled and nodded. Walking out of the main hall, a feeling of detached world emerged in Chunky's heart. The imprisonment that almost bound the unknown for many years was lifted, which means he has been free since then. He didn't expect that Xiaodijin would let him go so easily, or even stop him a little. I am afraid that he has also become the former emperor, who survived from the little emperor. Chapter 4694. After the destruction of the heavenly court, all the emperors who failed to die in the war were captured by the little emperor and thrown into prisoners in the next 3 days. As far as Chuanqiu knows, there are 3 emperors who, like him, have become prisoners of the ranks, but only he lives to this day and is also free. In the days to come, I will practice well. Only when I am strong can everything be expected. Jian Wushuang turned to look at him. Spring and autumn came back to God, nodded solemnly, and then he seemed to be determined and said, "Brother Jian, if you don't dislike, I will follow you." Jian Wushuang heard the words and was puzzled. "I have been imprisoned for so long. Don't you plan to go back and see?" Chuanqiu smiled bitterly. "The former heaven has long been destroyed. Now I am afraid that the old site has been wiped out. It is just a sorrow to go back. Instead of standing still, it is better to go with the sword brother and go to travel again." Jian Wushuang smiled. "Following my journey will be dangerous, are you sure?" Chuanqiu rode. "Of course I am sure, I have seen it long ago. Rather than spend a lot of time, it is better to do something meaningful." Jian Wushuang nodded and looked at the distant cloud top. "Then follow me." Yanjuanyenshu, the sky dome changes. In the next few months, the little emperor handed over the entire 6-day realm of the small orphans and the big orphans to Jian Wushuang. And he left the next 3 days used as a mineral deposit, and the 10,000 days. There is no human figure in the world of both sides. As the back garden of the little emperor, the strength is full, and it is easy to fit in the seatless. Shortly after entering Wu, the emperor, who usually only lives in the giant palace, appeared in Xiaogu Tian. "Brother Jian, can it be appropriate here?" The little emperor, still dressed in a luxurious dress with bright colors, gazed and smiled. The sword has no two-sided color and is calm, and no longer speaks after slightly nodding. After these few incidents, he did not have any affection for little emperor and these 6 heavens. The 100-year term was only a temporary excuse. Once the time was ripe, he never wanted to have any trouble with it. "You are so alone in this little lonely day, so go with me for the next 3 days." Xiaodijin turned and walked away slowly. Jian Wushuang got up, and after converging his breath, he followed him step by step. The structure of the entire 6-day realm is very peculiar, showing a pagoda shape and overlapping each other. For the next 3 days, it is a small lonely sky, a big lonely sky, and a million-eye sky. As a gathering place for prisoners, there were more than 100 Montenegros in the next 3 days. Every day, there were nearly 100,000 prisoners in the world, and a total of more than 500,000 prisoners were not a small number. Walking down the sky from the sky dome, there are dozens of Montenegros in your eyes. I learned from Chunky's mouth that there is a spar in the Montenegro that contains extractive power. No matter what state it is in great need. The main reason why the little emperor left so many prisoners is to extract these crystals one by one from Montenegro. Raising his hand and throwing a prismatic black crystal to Jian Wushuang, Xiao Dijuan said, "The crystal produced in this mountain is the foundation on which I grew up. Except for leaving a part of my own use, All the rest will lead to the crossing. Send to heaven and earth in exchange for various treasures. How do you feel? Xiao Dijuan asked back. Jian Wushuang nodded. Not bad. That's nature. This little crystal is enough to withstand ordinary cultivation for a few years, and the price is naturally expensive. Between the two speaking, they came to the most central part of this heaven and earth, and a towering big city was sitting on it. When he came to the top of this big city, Jian Wushuang noticed that there were only dozens of giant ships under construction, and people walked in them like tiny ants. These dark giant ships are not more expensive than spaceships. The two embarked on the cloud and dropped the giant ship. The little emperor waved his hand, and the deck responded. The Montenegrin crystal that filled the belly of the giant ship was printed into his eyes. Rao was the strength of Jian Wushuang, and his brows jumped. He waved his hands together again, and the little emperor pointed to the dozen giant ship lanes. These are the crystals that have been mined and ready to be sent to the rest of the world. This time, you will transport them. It's not just you alone. I will let the big companion take you along with you, and you can rest assured. Xiao Dijuan said, be prepared. The danger of going to the sea. Even if Yin Xian is a little careless, it is possible to fall into it. Although it was unclear, Jian Wushuang did not dismiss it. Perhaps this time, it was the best time to leave. Remember, these things can be thrown away, but people have to come back safely. On the deck, the little emperor turned slowly and stared. I don't want to let a powerful arm just disappear. Although Jian Wushuang feels a little weird in his heart, it is not easy to say something. When will it start? Don't worry. I will leave only 10 days later. I will give you personally. 10 days, just a flash. Jian Wushuang and Ziyagushan opened his eyes together with Chuanxiu. Ziyagushan's enchantment opened, and a thin purple robe came to lead him. 10 days ago, a total of 10 majestic giant ships stayed in the clouds. The Emperor Ziyadajan fell in front of Ziyagushan and looked at Jian Wushuang with a slight smile. Next, everything will be Brother Lao Jian. Jian Wushuang nodded, and when Chuanxiu was about to board the ship, Ziyadajan stopped him again. No matter what happens or not, it will return at most 10 years, and there will be important matters to discuss with. To understanding. As the two boarded the ship, the little emperor said indifferently, if he realizes that he has a heart to leave, he will kill him directly, otherwise he will spare no effort to protect him. The thin purple robe nodded. Voice was low. Please follow your highness password. The clouds rushed, and 10 giant ships full of Montenegro crystals disappeared into the sky and flew to the sea. The little emperor stopped for a while and disappeared. Sitting on the bow of the ship, Jian Wushuang seemed to return to the divine universe, and walked in the universe. But here is Dian Huan, a destined ultimate larger than the divine universe, a grand and unknown. Chuanxiu was extremely excited. This was the first time he had left the 6-day realm, after looking at the 8 galaxy. He even raised his hand and showed Jian Wushuang the scars of the decay of the galaxy. The demise of a galaxy may have surpassed the reincarnation of a universe. The decay of 8 galaxies. He can't imagine how old this young man, who still looks like a young man. Chapter 4695. On this first giant ship there were only 10 people. Jian Wushuang and Chuanxiu were cut away, and the rest belonged to the little emperor's people. In this regard, Jian Wushuang did not have any opinions. Instead, he himself would naturally use the same method. Except for the conversation between the two of them, the rest of the purple robes looked like dead people, standing at the corner of the deck lifeless. After several days of driving, 10 giant ships left the 6-day realm and entered a vast and barren galaxy. A giant sea without borders is like a static streamer, spanning all the world. Hundreds of millions of stars overhead exude a peculiar huamang, which is extremely beautiful. Sword Wushuang, sitting on the bow of the ship, waved his hand and took off a star, squeezing it into a round ball with the size of a thumb, and re-embellished it in the galaxy. From the 6-day realm to the rest of the world, it is the most difficult sea crossing to move forward. Jian Wushuang's speculation may be to prevent the strong players in the remaining world from robbing. As far as the sea is concerned, variables are nothing but ordinary, tidal waves are commonplace, and more importantly, there are countless unknown things that are silent in that sea. The giant ship headed into the giant sea, ripples from the sea surface, and then kept moving forward. Moving in the water, its speed is much lower than in the void. But according to the map given by Xiaodigen, it will take at least 3 years to reach the final destination. Sailing in this huge sea, time becomes the most meaningless thing. However, Chuanxiu is still very excited. This is his first journey of complete freedom, and he has printed everything he can see in his mind. Jian Wushuang was tired, sitting on the bow of the boat, and starting to sit down. Although his realm has been completely stabilized in the realm of Yanxian, the damage caused to him by the removal of the mud tire is still indelible. For a long time, his meridians have shown a unique old state. It wasn't until the real entry into this great Yanhuan that the irreversible injury inside the body was miraculously recovered. Jian Wushuang was very puzzled by this, but had no clue. After diligently entering the practice and practice sitting, the entire giant sea was silent. After more than half a year, Jian Wushuang seemed to have entered another ethereal state, and the memory that he had forgotten so long ago began to reappear in his mind. Slightly rickety, the old man stopped stepping on the blood sea of countless corpses, and walked with his steps. His white shirt was soaked with blood. Lao Zun, who carried the power of the entire Black Sea, also stepped forward, and the dark pupil looked at Jian Wushuang without a word. Another mist appeared in the depths of the memory. A kind of strangely familiar but unfamiliar atmosphere rose. You shouldn't come. The catastrophe here is far from what you can bear. You shouldn't come. The catastrophe here is far from what you can bear. A sound of arrogance exploded in Jian Wushuang's consciousness, and at the same time all the figures that had been or died began to overlap in everything, and finally turned into a thick black smoke. Leave or sleep. You should not bear all this. Leaving is the best choice. The familiar sound was almost instantaneous to make Jian Wushuang clear from the chaos. But as soon as he was sober, all the memories that appeared in his consciousness disappeared instantly, leaving even a trace of it. Yes, are you? Jian Wushuang's figure shook slightly, his face pale to the extreme. However, at this moment, a smirk sounded from behind. Emperor, why are you here? Spring and autumn are not filial, so I will come to see you. Jian Wushuang turned back subconsciously, and he saw Chuanxiu suddenly leaping from the deck and flew towards the dark sea. He saw it really, almost at the moment of the spring and autumn jump. He released the force and pulled it tightly, pulling it back suddenly. Afterwards, a ray of dark light appeared on the edge of the fence and disappeared instantly. Throwing spring and autumn on the deck, Jian Wushuang hurriedly looked up into the sea below him. But apart from the dark water, there is no other trace. The purple robes on the deck also noticed that something was wrong, such as the advent of the enemy. What's wrong? How did I sleep with a sore backache? Sitting up from the deck, Chuanxiu opened his sleepy eyes. Don't sleep, there is something in the sea, Jian Wushuang said with a deep voice, while releasing Yanli ready to explore in the sea. But to his surprise, even if the strength cannot be retained on the sea surface, just a moment will swallow the strength. There is something in the sea. Spring and autumn jumped up and looked nervously at the sea, trying to find the enemy hidden in the dark. However, everything was calm again, as if nothing had happened. I wish I had thought more, Jian Wushuang murmured. The 8 purple robes regained their previous stances and remained silent. For them, Jian Wushuang did not worry about it and was too lazy to take care of it. After all, 8 people with Yanxian strength were enough to deal with most crises. As for the remaining 9 giant ships, Jian Wushuang also glanced at a glance, no less than 5 Yanxian. After spending his time in shock, it was hard for him to enter the state of enlightenment. The reason was that he was not in him. It was in the divine consciousness that he could not tell whether it was a dream or an illusion. After reluctantly dispersing the inner messy news, Jian Wushuang forced himself to continue to sit down. But not long ago, Chun Qiu's slightly surprised voice resounded in his ears. How is it possible? In such a realm without human footsteps, how could there be these? Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, followed by everything that caught his eyes, and also surprised him. I saw that in the chaotic and hazy mist, there were thousands of Qianglu Yu, and Ruiguang appeared in the house, which was shocking. The scene, like a pavilion in the sky, now really appeared in front of me like a dream. But it was really extreme. Is it a mirage? Jian Wushuang, who has practiced since the end of the day, has thousands of enlightened roads. Among them, he also knows a lot about the spirit of the mountain. This mirage is just a spectacle, but there are also good spirits who use these illusions to confuse the monks and drag them into the deep sea to eat. But to say that the illusion that can confuse Yanxian realm is how to exert the power and spirit of the realm? Ningxin broke the fog in front of her, and Jian Wushuang looked at the front again, and was quickly surprised. The spectacle that thought it was a mirage of the mirage actually existed. Chapter 4696. The scene displayed in front of me is really incredible. That's just like the mountains rising high. Qianglu Yu lined up one after another. Brother Jian, how do you think? Chuan Xiaoning asked. Jian Wushuang did not open his mouth, but after staring for a moment he uttered a voice. Go around and leave with all his strength, not stay here for a moment. Several other Zipeo people heard that although there was no big move, they all urged themselves to make the giant ship change its course and advance at full speed. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. He always felt that his eyes looked at him from time to time in the dark, but he couldn't tell where he was. He meditated a few words in his heart, and hoped nothing would happen. After all, if there was any horror in the water, it would be a devastating blow. The giant ship sailed on the sea at a rapid speed, and the imaginary situation did not appear. This made Jian Wushuang quietly relieved, but then a trembling voice rang out in the spring and autumn. Brother Jian, do you think the houses before you are following us? Jian Wushuang's heart tightened, and he hurried back to look at it. I saw that Qianglu Yu, who was supposed to be thrown away far away, not only did not disappear at the moment, but moved closer and closer. The sea surface began to show waves and ripples, and all dark tentacles quietly attached to the fence of the giant ship. At the next moment, the sea suddenly rolled up, rising like a giant mountain river. That Qianglu Yu also rose. Everyone was shocked to watch this scene that had already happened. Beneath that Qianglu Yu, a muddy black head almost 1,000 miles away from the sea floor, a full of 10,000 pairs of red blood eyes, like tens of thousands of rounds of blood rising up. That is a giant sea octopus that has grown to the ultimate. The indescribable breath diffused out of it, which simply exceeded Jian Wushuang's existing knowledge. And those Qianglu Yu grew up on top of this giant sea sky chapter. A total of 10,000 pairs of blood under the head began to emerge, a tentacle comparable to the size of a real dragon, stirring the giant sea tumbling. Even the giant ship, which is almost bigger than one side of the world, looks like a plaything under this huge sea sky chapter. Even in the divine power universe, the ancestor body of Linhe Dragon Emperor Jian Wushuang saw was less than half of this giant sea sky chapter. Recovering from the shock, Jian Wushuang released the unmatched force for the first time, and the invisible long sword appeared in his hands. The rest of the purple robes also released their strengths at the first time. 10,000 pairs of blood eyes tightened at the same time, reflecting 10 giant ships in their eyes, and each tentacle the size of a real dragon surfaced at the same time, smashing the giant ship on the sea. Jian Wushuang's eyes condensed, and the vast expanse of strength turned into a pure barrier to protect the entire ship. At the same time, the remaining 8 purple robe bodies also moved, and each of them was not weaker than the strength of Yanxian realm, and turned into a layered barrier wall covering the ship's hull. Boom! The tentacles slammed into the barrier of enchantment transformed by Yin Li and shattered 6 layers directly. Jian Wushuang and others have received different traumas. The slight tearing feeling from the meridians has made everyone aware of the horror of this huge sea. The remaining giant ships had only one Yanxian sitting in the town, and suffered great disasters. 2 giant ships were broken by tentacles. Countless Montenegrin crystals were struck flying, emitting a dark purple mang shadow, and the sky dome embellished was extremely beautiful when it was about to fall into the deep sea. The entire sea surface was boiling, and the giant sea sky chapter rose from a deep altitude, lying prone on the surface of the sea, and with each flick of the tentacles, a giant ship laden with crystals shattered. And on the ship where Jian Wushuang is located, the barriers can no longer support it. The thin purple robe looked back at Jian Wushuang, and then tore a crack through the enchantment and suddenly jumped out. The rest of the purple robes also followed closely, turning into a strong force of strength, and swept towards the giant sea sky chapter. Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth and ran likewise. In the face of such terrifying existence, he released the Chuanjia Heaven Gate with all his strength. The magnificent Tianmen cave opened, as if the fingers of Yao Yao were directly resting on the head of Zhuhai Tianzong. Wow la la! Nearly 1,000 magnificent pavilions hidden in the mist were completely destroyed, even with their huge heads. That is, taking advantage of this momentary pause, the 8 purple-robed figures simultaneously penetrated the majestic force and merged into the most vast beam of light, which was smashed into the eyes of the giant sea Tianzong. The tragic howl that shook the heart like the singing of a sea monster. Just under this combined force, nearly 5,000 pairs of blood eyes have been wiped out. The unprotected eye chakra is obviously the weakest point of Zhuhai Tianzong. Thick ink-like condensate poured out frantically from its broken eye wheel, and fell into the sea to actually solidify the sea surface. At the same time, the traumatic trauma it caused made it completely crazy, like a vine-like tentacle waving wildly in the air. Every blow is enough to be fatal. There is a purple-robed Yanxian just taking a slow step, directly crushed into powder, and all form and spirit are destroyed. If you know that it is beyond the ancestor level, the more profound mysterious Yanxian realm, just hit by the giant sea Tianzong into powder. The sword had no color on both sides, and the invisible long sword swept out in his hand, directly cutting off several tentacles. At the same time, all kinds of supreme supernatural powers were thrown out by him instantly. Chuanjia Tianmen, Tianmen Jiao. These two complementary ancestral techniques, the power evaporating together is unimaginable. Especially under the blessing of natural talent in primitive universe, it is even more terrifying. Supreme divine prestige directly stretched the cracks of this world. The giant sea was boiling like hot water. With the appearance of these two ancestral supernatural powers, even the other 7 purple robes combined with the immortals were overshadowed by it. On one side, the giant palm evolved from countless soldiers, carried the momentum of town destruction, and directly bombarded the giant sea sky chapter. Because its size is too large, it is simply inevitable. Even the tentacles that are trying to resist touch this terrible form, and they all fall apart. 2 ultimate ancestral techniques, without suspense, pressed on the head of Zhuhai Tianzong. The figure of the tall, thin old man emerged, and he immediately understood it and looked at the hilt around his waist and laughed aloud. Unfortunately, this emperor has been obsessed with kendo for countless years, especially obsessed. Let me wait and see my today create your own kendo. At the end of the talk, the tall, thin old man suddenly pulled out his sword without a sword around his waist. However, the blade with a sharp edge was missing, but just pulled out a hilt. Chapter 4698. The air was a little stagnant for a moment, and the tall, thin old man thought, "Did you save the sword body and hilt separately?" The old man of Wei also appeared in the bowl of yang. He didn't have a good air. "Idiot, this is a broken sword. Can't you see it? Otherwise your sword body and handle are separated? But this is such a broken sword. It is difficult to break the source of this evil barrier." The tall, thin old man frowned tightly. The old man who appeared subsequently kicked directly, kicking the tall, thin old man holding the sword. "Let's talk, you go." In the wound as big as a tianqing, the tall and thin old man's hand with the broken Tai Luo Excalibur disappeared in a mixed manner, replaced by a restrained and calm prestige breath. Although it was broken, it was difficult to conceal the emperor's suit and hunted in the wind, and the supreme force spread out. It is like breaking away, directly breaking through the structure of the brain of the giant sea sky chapter, and going straight to the source. At the same time, the other two emperors also started at the same time, and the two long mans carrying Dewey merged into one and fell together. The power of supreme terror turned into a beam of light, bursting in the head of the giant sea sky chapter. Jian Wushuang only felt loose, and was blown out by the layers of shock waves. He hurriedly reached for a distant grip, and his strength was directly attached to the head of Zhuhai Tianzhong. With the tragic martyrdom shattered in his head, even these ultimate giants eventually mourned and fell, sinking on the sea surface, and then no sound. When the emperor's true shadow hits in three ways, his huge head begins to shatter, and various unknown fragments of tissue splash. One of the unique diffusing forces escapes, but it disappears in only a moment. Sword Wushuang leaped forward, and Gao Qing's invisible sword entered the wound. He seemed to have entered a vast space. There was a golden source in the center of the head of this giant sea sky chapter, like a big sun. With the sword broken, hundreds of millions of rays of light emerged, and all three emperors covered their eyes subconsciously. This Ruiguang burst for only a moment, then dimmed. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang looked forward, and a stone bead that had been incomplete for more than half stayed there, turning around. What is this thing? The tall, thin old man looked up and wondered. Just before that, Ruiguang, did this thing come out? No matter what it is, it can definitely be a treasure in the mind of this guy. The old man of Wei stepped forward and observed carefully. The old man with heavy pupils pouted. Look at your unintelligible sample. This little stone bead is definitely the big guy's tremendous strength, and the accumulation of days and months has accumulated. Although it is not a treasure, it is also a warm meridian. Has great benefits. The sword Wushuang on the side didn't open. He inexplicably felt that the broken stone bead was not the source of the giant sea sky chapter. The tall, thin old man also pouted. I thought there would be any baby. At the end of his speech, he raised his hand and pushed the stone bead to Jian Wushuang. Although this kind of thing is useless to us, it still has a lot of benefits for you. Just accept the warm meridians. Jian Wushuang did not resign. Shizhu started. Except for some dampness, there is no other strange. The broken piece on the stone bead was cut off by some kind of hard object, and looked slightly ugly. Putting the stone beads back into the bowl of Yang, Jian Wushuang and the three emperors walked in the head of the giant sea sky chapter for a while to ensure that they were dead before they left. Through this robbery, the entire squadron was seriously damaged, leaving only 4 ships full of Montenegro crystals capsized. Among them, Yen Xian also almost disappeared, and all those who survived gathered in the first giant ship. The soles of the feet landed, and Jian Wushuang returned to the deck. Everyone subconsciously stepped back half a step, and there was panic in his eyes. Chuanxiu hurried forward, trembling for the rest of his life. Brother Jian, it would be great if you were fine. Jian Wushuang nodded, fortunately. He turned his head to look at the number of people on the deck, less than 50. He said quietly that the danger had been eliminated. Please return to your ship. Everyone heard and looked at each other, and no one dared to leave. Jian Wushuang no longer said much, leapt forward to the bow, and began to recuperate the meridians. This battle almost forced him to the extreme, and the two ancestors used their skills simultaneously, and instantly consumed more than half of the vigor in his body. If he did not adjust the rate quickly, it would be difficult to cope with the sudden situation. He looked back and glanced. Doubts flashed in the huge sea skyzhang that was half floating on the sea. The real combat strength of this giant sea sky chapter and the breath he showed are not at the same level, and they can only passively defend against Jian Wushuang's offensive. If it wasn't for the shape is too huge, I am afraid that any one of the 3 emperors could cause heavy damage to it. And there are countless fairy lofts on the skull top of this giant sea sky chapter. Qiangluyu. It is very likely that a powerful person can use it as the cornerstone to create a secret realm. Failing to find some treasure in it turned out to be a great regret in Jian Wushuang's heart. After passing through this catastrophe without fear, the giant sea, which has penetrated many unknown worlds, returned to its former silence. Decades later, the thin purple robe that was pulled into 2 sections from the middle by Zhuhai Tianzhong woke up warily. and the waist and abdomen were intact. For Yin Xian, as long as there is a point left on the Yuanyuan Avenue, even if the body is broken into dust, it can be completely restored. Only this time, the origin of the thin purple robe was almost wiped out even with the real shadow. The face wrapped under the hood coughed lightly and stood up with the help of the people around him. He looked at Jian Wushuang's back, then walked towards Jian Wushuang. Chuanxiu noticed that after this scene, he immediately became alert. When he was hesitating whether to wake up Jian Wushuang, a slightly deep voice sounded. What happened that day? The old man thanked me here, and he will return to him in the future. In a word, the thin purple robe instinctively turned and left, unable to speak. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes, shook his head helplessly, and continued to close his eyes and sit. Sailing in the giant sea is extremely boring, except for the stars and the stars. There is nothing more to say. Chapter 4699. Jian Wushuang could see clearly when he was getting closer and closer. The vaguely plain shirt was indeed a human, but it was like he was seriously injured, and his waist and abdomen were red with blood. Besides, the whole body has nothing but the weak self-protection. Without the help of external forces, there is no possibility for this shirt to survive. After all, this huge sea that is connected to many places is really too vast and broad. Slightly hesitating, adhering to the repaired sword of Wushuang, he still used force to pick up the figure and place it on the deck. After being detached from the water, Su Shirt's body strength disappeared by itself, and the blood began to flow out from behind, fainting on the deck. Jian Wushuang leaped from the bow of the ship, waved his hand and released Yanli wrapped around his shirt. With a more magnificent and energetic intervention, the body of the plain shirt quickly fell silent. The almost waist-length hair fell slowly, revealing a pale and beautiful face. However, even if it is beautiful, it is difficult to cause a ripple in Jian Wushuang's state of mind. After all, after reaching the supreme, you can reshape the body. No matter what kind of beautiful face can be replaced. But on the contrary, few monks changed their original faces. At most, they were only slightly modified in details. A bit of doubt flashed in my heart. Jian Wushuang was incomprehensible in this boundless and immense sea. How could someone traverse alone? To know that even if it is Yin Xian, a little carelessness in this sea area will die. The woman appeared to be in danger, but left her life. After careful observation, Jian Wushuang didn't notice anything strange, and then sat down on the bow of the boat again. Instead, Chunki's eyes lit up, and he started to work around this woman in a plain shirt, urging Yanli to take care of her carefully. Time passed by quickly, and after this vast sea of boundless borders crossed thousands of cold and dead heavens and earth, the breath of life began to appear faintly in the heavens and earth on both sides. Fortunately, after going through the giant sea sky chapter, there has never been a terrorist presence under this giant sea, allowing only 4 giant ships to sail out of the most dangerous area. During this time, the woman in the suede who was rescued on the deck also woke up slowly. The first thing she woke up, she glanced around blankly, and then jumped out of the deck without hesitation. The consequence of this is that it is directly planted into the seawater. Rao is a sword with enough strength, and he can't help laughing, waving his hand to lift his figure in the sea. I said, girl, there is no improvement in your injury at all. You just leave like this, just like death. Jian Wushuang couldn't help crying. A woman in a plain shirt like a soup chicken looked at him coldly, and then coughed several times before closing her eyes softly against the fence. Jian Wushuang shrugged his shoulders, and lay on the bow of the bow on his back, taking a comfortable posture to take a nap. After a little hesitation, Chuanxiu prepared to take off his long suit and give it to the woman in the shirt. But then, the thin purple robe that had been silent as a dead man got up and threw a thick cloak to her. The Sushan woman looked at him with her eyes open, stretched her hand to cover the thick cloak, and fell asleep again. Everything has returned to silence. The Star River turns on the sky. When Jian Wushuang turned over at the bow of the ship and opened his eyes subconsciously, he saw the woman wearing a big cloak, standing in front of her, and looking at him calmly. With no sleepiness, Jian Wushuang sat upright, wondering, "What's the matter?" She withdrew her eyes and looked to the end of the giant sea. Her voice was as cold as her entire body. "Why save me?" Jian Wushuang was dumb for a while, but then said, "Of course it is unbearable." A wave of ripples flashed in the eyes of the Suzhan woman. "That's all." Of course. Jian Wushuang was helpless, and then lay on his back on the fence. For a long time, the Suzhan woman said coldly, "My name is Zheng Ying, and I will thank you in the future. It's not necessary to repay, just raise your hand." Jian Wushuang waved his hand, and then fell asleep again. The woman in the shirt named Zheng Ying glanced at Jian Wushuang again, before returning to Wuxia. After the third year, there were finally strong fluctuations in the sky and earth surrounding the giant sea. One side of the world is one side of the hidden world. And from the occasional conversation with the thin purple robe, these hidden sects are actually inextricably linked to them. This made Jian Wushuang, who was about to take time to escape, dispelled his inner thoughts. If it was really like the thin purple robe, he was sure that once he escaped, the drama code of being chased and killed in the divine universe will be staged again. Adhering to the principle that one more thing is worse than one less, Jian Wushuang still escorts the giant ship to the destination. The further forward, Jian Wushuang and others have been able to see the scattered Xiao Yinxian shuttled from time to time. This indicates that they have left the most dangerous area, but some powerful Yinxian cannot be ignored. After wielding the town and destroying several unremarkable ancestral scattered repairs, there was no longer any casual repair dare to come to rob the ship. But this situation did not last long. When hundreds of strong breaths surged in this small world, Jian Wushuang realized that the crisis was coming. The dozens of men headed reveal the realm of Yinxian, and the remaining hundreds of figures are all ancestral. Jian Wushuang was a little bit sighed with emotions, which belonged to the strongest in every universe, and he was willing to be a gangster in this great Yinhuan. However, there is a certain amount of swordsmanship that can be determined. At present, these ancestors in Daanhuan and the ancestors in the divine universe are basically two kinds of existence. The most important thing for the ancestors in the divine universe is to control the vast immense universe of luck and avenues. As for the ancestors in this great Yinhuan, they can only control one side of the world. Daquan luck is the most fundamental. Such a group of gangsters headed by dozens of Yinxian is obviously a strong force. Seeing this ship as the existence of a lamb to be slaughtered, the man in the head was already shining in the eyes. "All disembark at speed and accept the inspection." A whisper of mischief resounded in this world, but all the people on this giant ship were motionless, and there were many purple robes who even looked at the gangster with sarcasm. In their view, the end of these guys is already doomed. Chapter 4700. A fine ghost like Yin Xian took a step forward and said with a high arrogance, "Get me off the boat. After entering my whirling days, everything will be under our control, and if you know each other, you will be able to return you a way of life otherwise. They all die without a burial place." No one would believe the words of these desperate men. Jian Wushuang was sure that even if the archers sent the spars of these ships, the desperate men would never let them go. Everyone was ridiculed, and Chuanxiu pulled out a long knife from the waist. With the existence of the one who can destroy the supreme monster with his own strength, it is inexplicably reassuring. "Go away." A simple and concise word echoed through the world from Jian Wushuang's mouth. All the gangsters were startled, and then they laughed at each other. A total of 10 Yinxian, nearly 100 quasi-Yinxian, are terrifying to the extreme in any world. And at most there were only 5 Yinxian in these ships, so they dared to speak eloquently. How could they not make them stunned and laughed? The fine ghost grinned, when even pointing at Jian Wushuang blasted a huge wave of fire. However, the next moment, waiting for Jian Wushuang's shot, the woman in the shirt named Zheng Ying next to him shot directly, and a thicker force burst into the sky, instantly destroying the fire wave. Then Yanli, castrated, went straight to the door of the fine ghost's face. Boom! The fine ghost flew directly hundreds of feet, and then barely stopped his body. A face was covered with dye shop, and the blood of the gods flowed from the qiqiao. Jian Wushuang glanced at the extremely cold woman in the shirt, and after a slight smile, he jumped to the bow, stretching his hand and pulling out the broken tarot Excalibur in his waist. Thousands of swords were brought together. Okay, since you are not willing to disembark, then stay here all wandering. The head and strong man smiled abruptly, and a great magical power surged in his palm. A picture of Lu Yao and 8 diagrams, which is very inconsistent with his shape, sprang up from under his feet, among which there was a horror force. The 2 fists are all out, and a total of 100 gossip shapes are like a dense net, covering all over the world. Originally still holding the relaxed mind of Wushuang, seeing this system of gossip shape, could not help but be surprised. These guys are definitely not like the wild fox Zen with the same smell. It is most likely a hidden secular ancestor of some kind of organizational system. In order to teach these moves, the Tailuo Excalibur is broken, but the entire Tailuo Jiandian is in the heart of Jian Wushuang, and there are star points of Huameng condensed on the broken body of the Tailuo Excalibur, serving as the blade. One sword is done. The initial star-cutting magical power is now the same as the same day, and it is turned into a sword of heaven to completely disperse the dense network-like gossip graphics. Then Jian Wushuang stepped on the bow of the boat, stepped into the void, and spurted out with the sword. The violent sonic boom rang loudly, and ripples spread across the giant sea. The strong man who stepped on the gossip shape gazed. His left hand pinched tactics again, and a more magnificent Taiji dense gang was in front of him. The sword without any disadvantage was actually dissipated after piercing dozens of layers of Tai Chi. The strong man smiled with pride and urged his body to bombard Jian Wushuang again. As the 2 of them fought in the void, more than 100 gangsters rushed towards the giant ship with a grin. In their eyes, they were already regarded as lambs to be slaughtered, and rushed forward, rushing forward. Buzz! A pure pillar rises, and the breath of Yin Xian's extraordinary peak is rushing out like a river. The thin purple robe suddenly flicked his sleeves, and a gentle force like the breeze but irresistible rose, and directly caused the first 10 robbers who had swept back. At the same time, Zheng Ying also moved, and the big cloak fell to the ground. Her entire figure was like a hazy cloud of smoke standing on the outermost side of the giant ship. Chuanqiu opened his mouth, swallowed the words, he stopped, and then stood side by side with Zheng Ying, waiting for him. More than 30 other purple robes also jumped into the air together and began to fight hard. With a sword chopping off the gossip treasures coming from all directions, Jian Wushuang's eyes became more and more prosperous. Today, none of these robbers can live. Otherwise, if they escape one, they will most likely suffer a counterattack. It was another sword that forced the strong man back, and Jian Wushuang completely slayed his heart. Immediately, the strong man only felt that his whole body was broken in the void, and a supreme power could bind it firmly, and he ran towards Jian Wushuang uncontrollably. A great horror between life and death flooded his mind. He didn't dare to hesitate anymore, pinched his hands in succession, and thousands of layers of gossip treasures appeared around his body to cut off the invisible bondage. However, Jian Wushuang had expected that the talented supernatural primitive universe had been released as early as possible, directly weakening him unconsciously. The strong man was terrified, but it was hard to escape. Jian Wushuang lifted his sword straight ahead, without any difference falling on his head. The wailing sounded, but the imaginary origin was broken, and the scene of the god's annihilation did not appear. Tai Luo Excalibur actually deviated an inch, and cut off his ears. The strong man finally got rid of the shackles, clutching his blood-sprayed head and exasperated. You dare to hurt me? Do you know that hurting me is the enemy of the entire whirling heaven? Jian Wushuang smiled coldly, shaking his arms and flicking away the blood on the Tai Luo Excalibur. Okay, then I will let you be completely buried in this whirling sky. The strong man hated the sky, but the next moment was like a meteor, and he fled billions of miles in a blink of an eye. The rest of the gangsters fled when they saw it. Jian Wushuang used his magical powers, and only stopped after killing nearly 20 ancestors. Rao is so, or more than 30 gangsters escaped. Zheng Ying drifted forward, apparently intending to cut the grass. Jian Wushuang reached out and pulled her out and then shook her head. The poor Ko-Ma-Chai. If attacked in this sea will be very troublesome. Zheng Ying's face flashed unnaturally, flicking away Jian Wushuang's palm, and returned to the ship. After releasing so many gangsters, this is something that Jian Wushuang did not anticipate. If it is really as he guessed, behind these gangsters is the so-called hidden world in the so-called whirling sky. May fight back. Brother Jian, what are we next? Chuanxiu asked. Chapter 4701. On the sky dome where there is no big sun, a series of red-ons emerge, linking with each other, like a dense net. It is like to crowd everyone in it. Going ashore. Jian Wushuang broke the line, and took the lead to step into the wandering earth. Spring and autumn followed, and Zheng Ying's eyes flashed a hesitation, and immediately followed. The others, led by the thin purple robe, also jumped ashore. This whirling heaven is the same as other small worlds. The only difference is that it is full of blooming lotus flowers. Looking around, it is extremely relaxed and happy. As Jian Wushuang and others went ashore, the previously escaped gangsters, and others all fell from the clouds. I said that if you were to die in this whirling sky, you would never be able to take a step. The strong man whose ear was cut off by Jian Wushuang had not even wiped the blood from his face. There is a hint of humor in the grudge. On the basis of your stinky fish and rotten shrimps, and learn from others' robbery? Jian Wushuang took a step slowly, and the vast expanse of strength surged up. This time, it is not only your ears that fell. The strong man grinned cruelly, and then he stepped back half a step. A few moments later, thousands of colorful shadows were revealed on the darker sky dome, and a lotus platform immediately broke through the clouds and slowly emerged. Above this lotus stand, sat a bald-headed Luohan who was born with a fat body. There are thousands of colorful shadows across the background, immortal. Because the aura is too strong, even Jian Wushuang could not help but glanced at it. The ancestors are them. They dare to desecrate you. The disciple, as the ancestor of the ancestors, can't wait for a while to come and dispose of you. The strong man covered his head, and pretended to be angry. However, the bald-headed Luohan, sitting on the lotus platform, did not seem to hear what the sturdy man was saying, looking at Jian Wushuang, and the others in his eyes. Jian Wushuang inexplicably felt a little disgusted. How could he not know the meaning of that gaze? Obviously this bald-headed Luohan was not a good bird, and entered the Tao with evil. Old ancestor, old ancestor? The strong man tentatively shouted several times. There was a touch of disgust in the eyes of the bald-headed Luohan, and he slapped him directly with a sleeve, covering the head that had been drawn blood again. The strong man dared to speak out. I am the wandering ancestor of the whirling days, Ru and other juniors. Why don't you kneel when you see this seat? The supreme dignity is revealed, quite sacred. Jian Wushuang stepped forward and raised his eyebrows with a chuckle. Who am I? But it's just the head of the wild fox Zen. The bald-headed Luohan, who professed to be a wandering ancestor, looked stiff, and an unbearable humiliation poured into his heart. Junior, you just called this Yehu Zen. It was repeated again. Chuanxiu and others couldn't help laughing. Rao was cold. Zheng Yingdu raised his eyebrows slightly. Yehu Zen is a general term for some people who arbitrarily call open schools, enlighten and flow into evil ones, and those who get the Tao have a great insulting effect. He saw the blood like a sword without a match, and even tore the false face of the bald-headed Luohan directly. Jian Wushuang continued to sneer. This is Yehu Zen. He only went astray by 3 strokes and 2 methods, and he opened the school to mislead the children. You are not Yehu Zen. Why did your disciple cut off my ear? As soon as this remark came out, Chuanxiu and others immediately laughed, and their voices resounded through Jiuxiao. The bald-headed Luohan was ashamed and irritable. He jumped up and gave the strong man a slap in the face. Waste! Where did the strong man withstand this slap in the face? Suddenly stared at Venus, and fell straight into the clouds. I do not know what the world is. After teaching the disciples, the bald-headed Luohan stared fiercely at Jian Wushuang. Junior, you now have your life in this seat. Pull out your fangs one by one. At the end of the speech, he suddenly waved his arms. A sharp octagonal and 8 trigram treasure cut open the void and slashed towards Jian Wuxuang. His gaze narrowed, and the broken tarot Excalibur stood in front of him. There was a crisis at the bottom of my heart. Jian Wuxuang looked forward and saw that the octagonal and 8 trigram treasure suddenly dispersed in the wind and turned into 2 left and right. The blood of the gods fell. If not Wuxuang Mu got out in time, I am afraid that both arms would be cut off on the spot. The bald-headed Luohan smiled and hung his head in Yunxiao. Now that you are self-disciplined in front of this seat will make you die more comfortably. The vigorous force surged, and the wounds on the left and right arms that were deep in the bone healed instantly, and Jian Wuxuang slowly spit out a slurred breath. Achieving the status of Yanxian, the Chaos Overlord has also been completely transformed for the immortal fairy body, even if the source is broken, but as long as there is a breath anywhere in the world, it can be completely resurrected. 3 strokes and 2 methods, but still can't shake off your name as Yehu Zhen. Jian Wuxuang smiled disdainfully. At the next moment, a magnificent Tianmen quietly emerged above his head, and hundreds of millions of ray of Huamang emerged from the Tianmen. After seeing this scene, the bald-headed Luohan was stunned, and then the 2 eyes suddenly opened wide, and the light rose sharply. There is such a pure breath. If this seat swallows you, the state will be perfect. The bald-headed Luohan's voice trembled, and his fat figure also stood up directly from the lotus platform. Heaven is so! He yelled loudly. His arms and shackles struck, and all the dynamism of the entire whirling day had gathered to him. The world has changed dramatically, and even the earth has been lifted by the weird hurricane. An 8-armed wrathful treasure appeared behind him, occupying almost the entire size of whirling sky. This 8-armed angry eye treasure has 2 heads, 1 light and 1 dark, 1 black and white. 4 pairs of big day-like eye wheels looked at Jian Wuxuang and sent a sense of oppression. Everyone feels that the power in the body seems to be suppressed, and the flow is slow. It's all turned into nourishment during my whirling days. I will remember each of you. Bald Rohan said intoxicatedly. Jian Wuxuang's eyebrows were tightly tightened, and that kind of power realm finally came to him. However, the change is steep, and the head of the giant sea sky chapter can be poked out of a hole-shaped giant finger. Chapter 4702. Jian Wuxuang no longer hesitated, directly held up his palm, and the great power of the supreme force came out. The terrifying power that even Yanxian was enough to annihilate turned into a beam of unmatched light, swayed straight up, and bombarded the advent of the black gold giant palm. However, an incredible scene appeared. The 2 collided, and the thousands of sintered Su Huamang produced by the martyrdom were scattered. But the black gold giant palm was just a tremor. Not only was it not damaged at all, but became more solidified. Retreat! Jian Wuxuang's eyes were fixed, and his figure retreated quickly. Chuanqiu and others also immediately set off, and tried their best to escape the range of the black gold palm. There were 5 weaker realms who were smashed on the spot, and their body was absorbed. The earth was smashed thousands of feet, tearing out a deep abyss. The bald-headed Luohan standing on the lotus floor smiled, and as his body walked, the 8-armed arrogant Luohan behind him also moved away from the clouds and appeared in the clouds. And the unspeakable beauty was strange. 2 heads, 1 black and 1 white, then lowered 4 beams of light from their orbits. Jian Wuxuang waved his hand to form a border, and covered everyone in it. Then he held the invisible sword, rose up, stepped on the pillar of light, and went straight to the lotus platform that day. The bald-headed Luohan's gaze condensed, and he lowered his palms and lowered the layers of gossip-dense gangs. The 8 arms behind his eyes also opened a huge mouth at the same time. Rao Shi Jian Wuxuang all felt that the diffusivity scattered around him was swallowed. Small-mouthed Junior, please be on your head. The bald-headed Luohan laughed strangely, and Jiangxi burst into countless gossip secrets between his arms. The sword stepped on the pillar of light without both feet, guiding the invisible sword with 1 hand, and thrusting straight forward. Another great sword. 100,000 swords are unified. There is no fancy Huamang overflow. but people dare not look directly at it. The sky dome was torn apart under this blow. The absolute sword is like entering the realm of no one, instantaneously breaking through the layers of gossip-dense gangs, and then the unrelenting thorns towards the bald-headed Luohan. Because everything was so fast, the bald-headed Luohan hadn't reacted, and the saber sword hit his left face. The blood of the spewed out, and a complete left ear fell on the lotus platform. This is a completely naked insult. The bald-headed Luohan recovered from disbelief, and the repeated humiliation made him crazy. Regardless of the wound on his head, he took another step forward. His 8 arms behind his back raised his arms in anger and smashed into Jian Wushuang. A total of 8 infinite powers that cover the sky and cover the sun cover the entire whirling sky. Jian Wushuang's eyes are dignified. From these several confrontations, the bald-headed Luohan, who claims to be the ancestor of the wandering ancestor, is still at the peak of Yanxian. But the dynamism he shows is faintly showing signs of breakthrough, especially behind him. The 8-armed wrathful spectacle even made it exceeded in one fell swoop, reaching a certain unknown state. The terrible power shook the world, and Chuanxiu and others have already opened the barriers of strength in order to deal with this disaster. And Jian Wushuang wanted to set aside the Boyang bottle to allow the 3 emperors to participate in the war. But there were still more than 20 little emperors on the sidelines who accompanied him. If he released the 3 emperors hurriedly, he was afraid that he would not be able to explain it anyway. After quickly dismissing this thought, Jian Wushuang thought about it, and the style of Tianmen came to mind. The giant palm covering the sky, which was condensed by the quintessence of thousands of soldiers, surged like a big day and hit the 8 black gold giant palms. Layers of blasting ripples swept up from the center point, instantly swept away the clouds and mist that enveloped the entire whirling sky, and at the same time, the huge sea surface also stirred up huge waves. In this unimaginable martyrdom, even Yanxian couldn't withdraw from the whole body. Even those who were far away from the battle circle, such as spring and autumn, felt strong palpitations. Jian Wushuang retreated half a step, and the Tianmen Jifu eventually dissipated, but the 8 black gold giant palms were still bleak to the extreme. But they still existed, and the unstoppable guy came to him. On the occasion of a desperate attack, a sturdy yet extremely tenacious dynamism turned into layers of barriers, blocking the top of Jian Wushuang's head, which actually made those 8 black gold giant palms difficult to enter. At the same time, a thin purple robe did not know when to appear behind his back, buzzed out 2 words, "Go." Jian Wushuang grasped the enlightenment, and immediately flew away, turned into the sharpest arrow, and shot at the bald-headed Luohan. Thousands of strands of huamang condensed in Jian Wushuang's palm, almost when the bald-headed Luohan reacted, and then surrounded him to the sky. Bald-headed Luohan's face flashed a little panic. He hurriedly waved his hands, then abandoned the lotus platform, and sat in the palm of his back with 8 arms in anger. Jian Wushuang rushed to his feet, chopping the lotus platform with 1 foot, and gazing at the bald-headed Luohan's gaze calmly like water. The ears cut off by a sword have grown back, but he is still angry and resentful in his heart, after being repeatedly humiliated. Even if the bald-headed Luohan now understands that he has kicked the stubble, he can no longer look back under the drive of his mind. As long as it can be completely swallowed, it will certainly be able to take that step. At the thought of this, the bald-headed Luohan flashed in his eyes, and sneered at Jian Wushuangdo. "Junior, if you are willing to kneel down and knock on 3 sounds for this seat today, this seat will ignore your previous suspicions, and let you leave Whirlpool. How?" Jian Wushuang was so calm that he smiled coldly. "Depending on your incompetent practice, it also deserves to let me kneel? If you knock 300 loud heads at me, I might consider keeping you a whole corpse. Crazy man, this seat is sitting here today to see how you can treat me." The bald-headed Luohan stood up and stood in the arms of his 8 arms, screaming loudly. Undoubtedly there was him. Jian Wushuang lifted the sword and swept away, and the vast sword slashed forward, but he did not shy away, and took it with his body. Jian swept through and directly cut off one of the arms of bald Rohan. Then he cried with the pain in his arms, and his subconscious body stepped back, obviously trying to escape. There is a crack in his mind. As long as we find it, everything will not break through. Jian Wushuang nodded, then stepped forward. And the three old men in the damaged imperial clothing all lie on him and act as a guide. Moving forward in the dark, with the luck of the three emperors, the vitality in the body has not dissipated, and there are signs of recovery. Away from the layers of fog, countless monks whose unconscious souls floated in this strange space. It's really stinky generation. I'm sure that the evil spirit of this old boy was definitely learned from Zhen Wuyang. The tall, thin old man waved his hands in disgust, and at the same time, an emperor hui wrapped around Jian Wushuang's body. Mo Yao is contaminated with these causes and effects. The other two emperors nodded affirmatively, waved their hands and started to disperse the real souls that were coming up close together. After completely dispelling these true souls, Jian Wushuang counted more than 90,000 steps in his heart, and then he reached the place where the wind blew loudly. There was a raging wind, but for him, it didn't matter. The three emperors jumped from behind Jian Wushuang and stood at the forefront. This should be the weakest point of the old kid. Old Suha should be yours this time, the tall, thin old man said squintingly. When did this emperor make no effort? The old man with heavy pupils pouted, and while speaking his palm flicked forward. Immediately, an extremely complex palm line, carrying Di Hui, bombarded the weakest point. The grotesque world of this side suddenly trembles, and there is a wailing roar that does not know where it came from. Cracks radiating golden awns began to appear. The tall and thin old man, and the Wei old man also started to move at the same time, each raising their palms and waving two magnificent and full of Emperor Hui palm lines, kickasin forward. Combined with the power of the emperor, without God's brilliance, it would easily break through this strange world. Although it had been expected for a long time, Jian Wushuang was taken aback by being so relaxed and freehand. The uncontrollable atmosphere appeared when the three emperors swayed the emperor pattern. At the same time, he also relieved himself secretly. If he was in Wan Mushan, he had killed one of the emperor's real shadows, regardless of whether he would leave Wan Mushan alive. The kind of incomparable hegemony, even if it is only for the real shadow of the emperor, is also trembling. At the same time, the bald-headed Luohan, who was sitting on his shoulders with 8 arms glaring and absorbed Wu Sit, suddenly opened his eyes and looked at his belly. With the belly button as the center, a series of gold streaks spread, and almost all of his stomach was covered in an instant. In the next moment it burst directly. Chapter 4704. Jian Wushuang didn't know when to appear. His figure stood in the void, and Hua Mang overflowed from his fingers, like the sand, scattered throughout the whirling sky. The people who were struggling to resist only felt that the pressure on the whole body was relaxed, and the almost shocking 8-arm anger was actually stopped at this moment, and then the 8 arms closed and the 4 eyes closed. Why, what's going on? Chuanxia was puzzled at first, and then looked at the Wushuang sword that stood on the void, and the golden sand like huamang surging around him. They all understood. Jian Wushuang has already given him a kind of strong image in the invisible form, trying to turn the tide and keep everything in his mind. The last one who can give Chuanxia such a sense of centering is his Emperor Fenghua. With the stagnation of the 8 arms, the entire whirling sky fell into a verge of collapse. The shattered bald-headed Luohan was blown up, his eyes wide open, and he looked desperately at Jian Wushuang. Although Yanxian realm, as long as the breath is endless, it is close to immortality, but he is horrified. He feels that everything in his body is quickly dissipating, like being stripped by some kind of supreme energy. Slowly spit out a muddled breath. Jian Wushuang stretched out his hand and grabbed it, and then he captured the bald-headed Luohan's head in his hand. The great horror between life and death made his teeth tremble, and even the words were incomplete. Master Yanxian, please let go. Jian Wushuang was obviously too lazy to talk nonsense. If this bald-headed Luohan had not been able to wait for the robbery, then there must be no such series of things. This is the end of the matter. 2 fingers outstretched in the middle of the face of the bald-headed Luohan. A domineering energy that could not be overcome at all shattered his source. Do not. The ugly head is fragmented, which occupies the entire whirling ancestor, and eventually dies in Jian Wu's hands. In order to prevent him from dying, Jian Wushuang used the magical power to completely wipe out the world with hundreds of millions of miles of whirling sky, and wiped out any breath that might be revived. At this point, on the premise of not hurting other creatures, most of the whirling days have been reduced to death. As the bald-headed Luohan fell, the shocking 8-armed eyes did not disappear, but turned into a slab-sized painted pottery, and fell into the hands of Jian Wushuang. Stretching 8 arms, staring like a bell, it was a bit ugly. Falling from the void to the ground, Chuanxiu came forward excitedly. Brother Jian, great. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, and threw the palm-sized colored pottery to Chuanxiu. Send you. What's this? Chuanxiu caught it in a hurry, and fiddled with it curiously. As soon as the bald Arhat died, his disciples who were originally scattered as birds and beasts were wiped out by Jian Wushuang. As soon as he jumped onto the deck, Jian Wushuang returned to his old position on the bow, and began to sit up. Zheng Ying glanced at his back, then walked back to the ship. In the battle in the whirling days, the team with a large number of people left only less than 20 people, and more than half of them were killed in the Sea of the Giant Sea. And this turbulent voyage is about to come to an end. Through the whirling world, continue to move forward. Within a certain period of time, the mysterious Zheng Ying quietly disappeared again. Somehow, Jian Wushuang was unable to say anything about this woman, who had become a mystery. As the waterway approached its end, one side's immense and magnificent heaven and earth replaced the previous waves. The mysterious atmosphere also relieved Jian Wushuang's vigilant heart. From time to time, Yin Xian, who rides a fairy crane, leaves a splash of white on the sky. Various extreme forms seem to constitute the main color of this great Yin Huan. After several years, the ship finally sailed to the Injingchuan. This is a majestic superheaven. It is rumored that this was a dojo without the understanding of a king of God. It was full of strength, but it was immortal. Looking at the several giant ships driving in the giant sea, the top repairers have already been surprised and not even curious. Swimming across the river, several giant ships entered one after another, and at this time there were dozens of black-shirt Yinxian coming out of the sky. The thin purple robe immediately threw a pale gold seal from his hands, and fell into the hands of the first person. After counting the interest, the head of the black-shirt Yinxian flicked, and the sky door constructed by Yunwu Yanli opened. It's finally here. Chuanxiu stretched out a long lazy waist, and his eyes glanced forward subconsciously, his figure suddenly stunned. Jian Wushuang also frowned. I saw that after the heavenly gate of Neijingchuan, a body dressed in extravagant clothes, with a slightly scattered figure on his face, stood there as if he had been waiting here for a long time. Seeing the giant ship arrive safely, the little emperor smiled and jumped towards the deck. Have seen the little emperor? The thin purple robe carrying more than 10 purple robe kneeled down on one knee and returned to life. Great companion is accompanied by labor. Xiaodajan nodded his head. Yanli turned into a breeze and lifted the thin purple robe and others. And then he turned his attention to Jian Wushuang's body. Good job. What do you want? Goddesses exercises heaven and earth? Listed dozens of them one by one. He waited for Jian Wushuang to reply. 50 years. Jian Wushuang said something unintelligible. The little emperor smiled. 70 years. Jian Wushuang acquiesced, and then said, Since there is nothing wrong, I will go back to sleep. Don't worry, you should haven't been to this place before, and it'll take you here for a turn. It's not too late to return. Little emperor finished his words and didn't wait for Jian Wushuang to answer, so he carried his hands. Yu hurried to Jingchuan. Jian Wushuang shook his head helplessly, then said to Chuanxiu beside him, You are waiting for me here, and I will go back when I go. Chuanxiu glanced around and quickly shook his head. Forget it. I'm still following Brother Jian. We can take care of each other. Jian Wushuang didn't say much, and his figure moved forward. As one of the most vast worlds, has terrible heritage in Sichuan, and the monks who can come here are all top repairers. Just a glance, there are dozens and hundreds of ancestors. In terms of ancestry, Jian Wushuang had a brief discussion with Chuanxiu not long ago. There is no such thing as an ancestor in this great Yanhuan, but it is replaced by Yanjing. In other words, every ancestor in this great Yanhuan is actually called Yin Yan. At the same time, the ancestors of these dynasties who belong to the ancestral class are slightly less powerful than the ancestors in the divine universe. And this half of it belongs to the great luck of the road, which cannot be copied and is unique. Going side by side with the little emperor, he laid his feet in front of the portal of the river and marched on this reckless and vast plain. Chapter 4705. Except for the flocks of cranes on the sky dome, the rest is to pass the top of the head from time to time. After being promoted to Yen Xian, in addition to using the mind to shuttle, the most simple little magical power, such as Shidishan, is also widely used. Obviously, this little emperor is already a Yen Xian. The two used the magical powers of shrinking mountains and rivers to travel over the mainland. It was hard for spring and autumn, and he sprinted with all his strength, but it was only able to follow behind the two. With a breadth of tens of thousands of miles, this great river and lake in the Chuantian domain has a net view. Among them, there are no fewer than 100 prosperous cities, and even Yen Xian exchanges their experiences and exercises here. Jian Wushuang and Xiaodajin walked in one of the largest sky cities, where thousands of roofs were repaired and prospered. Countless rare treasures are randomly placed on the ground for exchange and trading. This thing is a hard currency, and you can basically buy everything you need. Xiaodajin's palm rubbed a thumb-sized Montenegrin crystal, and then threw it into Jian Wushuang a nano bag. Use whatever you want. Although there are many top repairs in this prosperous sky city, there is no one noisy. Everyone seems to have a goal when they come here, and they leave immediately after completion. Walking in this, Rao Shi used to see the treasure of Wushuang's sword, and also began to be tempted. There are all kinds of treasures. Some of them are even broken with fine emperor luck. Jian Wushuang is also among the horrible treasures in this stock, and has selected some useful kendo books. As the little emperor said, the Montenegrin crystal was really a hard currency, but it was the crystal of a small ship, so he bought 4 or 5 copies of kendo alone. For kendo, Jian Wushuang hopes to draw a point of insight from each unknown kendo to enrich his entire kendo framework. The little emperor beside him especially likes to buy some gadgets that are useless but clever. Along the way, the gadgets stuffed into the bag were no more than 100. Jian Wushuang didn't really like the place where the crowd gathered. Just as he was about to explain the situation, there was a strange feeling in the sky, which made him subconsciously look at the unobtrusive paving on his side. Among the various treasures that seemed to have been deserted for infinite years, a slab-sized bone armor with dense and intricate patterns was reflected in his eyes. Stopped, Jian Wushuang came to the pavilion step by step. His eyes were already wide open. From his point of view, the inscrutable obscure patterns on the bone armor seemed to constitute a certain pattern or text. 1. Mysterious. Jian Wushuang trembled, and subconsciously took the bone armor with his hand. An extremely old palm suddenly grasped his wrist like an eagle claw, making it harder to score a half. Everything on my stall will only be exchanged and not sold. A hoarse and low voice sounded from under the shabby robe. Only half of the face exposed from the hood was covered with black and white stubble, and it looked extremely old. Jian Wushuang, who had wanted to throw the entire bag to him, was stunned, but he didn't know how to answer. At the moment of the stun of Jian Wushuang, his palm like an eagle claw suddenly cut open the palm of his palm, and I did not know what was taken out. Everything was completed in an instant, and it was almost over when Jian Wushuang reacted. He yanked his palm back suddenly, only to find that his palm was intact, and there were no scars at all. But that kind of tangible pain still reminded of Wushuang. Everything that happened just now is true. What did you do to me just now? Jian Wushuang's voice was low, and a pair of cold eyes was already flowing out of the murderous opportunity. It's just a negligible exchange condition that is harmless to you. Now it's yours. The stallkeeper hidden under the black robe whispered, and placed the bone armor in Jian Wuxuang's hands. After realizing that there was nothing strange in the body of the god, Jian Wuxuang was too lazy to investigate, and looked at the bone armor in his hand with a frown. The little emperor who stood aside saw this when he saw that his anger was not good, and he immediately showed interest, crouching down and looking at the bone armor together. The glyphs that could be seen vaguely from a certain angle disappeared when viewed carefully. The mysterious characters and characters that had become clearer in the past are no longer visible at this moment. But Jian Wuxuang has a kind of intuition. This bone armor definitely records some kind of ancient things, and it must be related to that one. This bone armor, where did you get it from? Jian Wuxuang raised his eyes and asked him. The stallkeeper shook his head. I don't know. No one can know his origins. Perhaps only when he has to appear. Everything will be clear. Unorganized sentences are obscure and difficult to understand, as if they were foreshadows or signs. Just when Jian Wuxuang wanted to ask again, the guardian spoke again. But this time, it was about their safety. Someone is looking at you in the dark, just do it. Jian Wuxuang heard the words, thought about it, and looked subconsciously not far away. Thousands of monks have been deliberately hiding their breath, all looking at this moment. Buzz! Nearly 100 arrows from the sky, carrying supreme force, swept from all directions. Jian Wuxuang suddenly waved his arm, and a pure barrier was to wrap all three of them together. Zheng zheng zheng. Each one had arrows thick enough to penetrate through the barrier wall, but then it was difficult to score a half. Looking at the sharp arrows less than 1 finger away from his own eyes, the little emperor's face was extremely gloomy. Jian Wuxuang was silent, and raised a palm to move away from the air. When the void collapsed, a man in black robe was directly carried over by him. But without waiting for everyone to speak, the captured man in black robe actually smashed his source directly, and turned it into a powder on the spot. At the next moment, the sky above the entire sky city cracked directly. Hundreds and thousands of people in black robes swept across the sea, like a deep sea that could not see the side. Rao is Jian Wuxuang, his face is a bit ugly. From these figures surrounded by all directions, he noticed the breath of at least 15 yin xian, and the countless ancestors. Are these all looking for you for revenge? Jian Wuxuang frowned, looking at Xiao Dijuan. The little emperor's eyes are as thick as water. How do these dogs and debris know that this seed is here? Chuanxiu touched Sword Wuxuang without knowing the trace, and his eyes signaled to leave quickly. Jian Wuxuang did not make a decision. With the dissipation of the Tianmen Gate of the Power Realm, a more majestic horror kendo pours out, turning into a long sword of kendo. Some ancestors died on the spot, and even a black robe yin xian was accidentally cut off half of the body. The little emperor is located on the side of Jian Wuxuang's body, and in the extravagant clothes, he easily grabs any ancestor who comes forward. 3 pairs of thousands, this is impossible and crazy. Although the ancestors can't do much damage to Jian Wuxuang and Xiaodigen, but with their attracted damage, the 15 Yinxian still caused great trouble to the two. A sword lured the first immortal who approached first. Jian Wuxuang directly released the vast sword, and barely separated them. At the same time, more than 10 purple robes rushed to death from a distance. Little Emperor, the big companion is late. The thin and small Zipeo directly swung his arms away from the ancestors, blocking him in front of him. Not late, just came, Xiaodigen smiled. And rush out with me. At the end of the speech, the vigorous force rose up and swept across the field. Spring and autumn are struggling to support, but he is an ancestor. Without the protection of Jian Wuxuang, I am afraid that he would have been strangled as a fan. Unwilling to be reconciled to this, he reached out and took out the 8-armed colored pottery previously given to him by Jian Wuxuang. The 8-armed colored pottery rose in the hands of spring and autumn in the hands of the storm. But in an instant, it grew into a shocking 8-armed arrogant Luohan. It's done. Chuanxiu smiled excitedly, and he didn't dare to underestimate the terrifying strength of his eight-armed anger. The full-formed eight-armed anger is almost at the same level as the whirling ancestor of the whirling sky. For some reason, the whirling ancestor was far beyond the peak of Yanxian and reached a more profound state. And this eight-armed angry eyes has naturally exceeded the peak of Yanxian and has reached a certain unknown level. Looking at this almost ugly figure, all black-robed people stopped subconsciously for a moment. It was at this moment that a total of 8 black gold palms fell towards the ground with an unstoppable momentum. Boom! Because Yanxian was unable to dodge, the source was crushed on the spot, and the ancestors even disappeared, turning into a layer of nourishment and absorbed by the 8 arms. Brother Jian, let's go. Chuanxiu turned around and screamed angrily. It would be too late to go again. Jian Wushuang nodded his head, reached out to call out Tianmen's ulterior motives, striving for an opportunity to escape. The giant palm covering the sky, which was made up of thousands of gods and soldiers, descended from the heavenly gate and fell to the ground in a covering manner. A group of Yanxian who had already known its power directly dispersed in a tacit manner, and their bodies rushed in all directions, blocking the retreat of several people in due course. The huamang subsided, and there are still thousands of black robes in the shape of the deep sea, which makes people breathless. One of the black-robed Yanxian took a step forward, pointed to the little emperor, and then said, "Leave him behind. Any of you can leave this place. I will never stop." Chuanxiu looked at Jian Wushuang with some urgency in his eyes. For him, it was obviously very good to be able to see the death of the enemy by siege. But without waiting for the sword Wushuang to open, the thin purple robe took the first step and slowly pulled down the hood on his head, revealing an old cheek covered with scars of the gully. At this level, even your master can't help it, let alone all of you. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.